you, and we trust that the positive and collaborative relations which I've enjoyed with Senator Motley in our preparations and arrangements for our sittings will of course continue with you, and that the Senate will continue to be the place of good repute that it has always been. So we welcome you, we wish you well in this new phase of your political participation, and again look forward to an active and productive day's work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Motley.
I want to join with the Leader of Government Business and with you, Mr. President, in extending a very warm welcome to Senator Peter Murcott Bunting. He has an ability to attract some level of controversy, because now the moniker by which he's fondly known is the 8th Senator. Today he takes on a very important role, but life has prepared him well for that. As you have said, Mr. President, you have served with him on the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. He has been a General Secretary for the People's National Party, and he was the 5th Minister of National Security for Jamaica. He has distinguished himself in Parliament with his contributions. And even though the Senate is a slightly different setting and slightly different place, I am sure that he will continue to make the sort of contributions which have made him quite noticed on the Jamaican political landscape. We all welcome him, and we all pledge our cooperation as we work together to do the nation's business, if it pleases you.
Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues, senators, parliamentary staff, family, and friends. Today marks a new phase in my political journey. I commit to resume my parliamentary service with thorough preparation, a solutions orientation, and robust engagement. The work of the Senate is primarily focused on review and passage of proposed legislation. And I anticipate that my experience as a 4-term legislator in the House of Representatives will serve me well in the upper house. I helped to develop and pilot through the lower house a number of path-breaking bills, including the DNA Evidence Act, the Law Reform, Suppression of Criminal Organizations Act, now called commonly referred to as the Anti-Gang Legislation, and the Law Reform Fraudulent Transactions Special Provisions Act, called popularly the Anti-Lottery Scam Act. These pieces of legislation are now powerful weapons in the arsenal of law enforcement. In my continuing role as a legislator, I look forward to working with the Leader of Government Business in the Senate to facilitate a robust legislative agenda. I thank Senator Scott Motley for her collegial and constructive leadership in the Senate, and I intend to rely on her experience to help me master the intricacies of this House. Mr. President, given that certain constitutional office holders and indeed investigative journalists had to grab the bull by the proverbial horn to enable the Senate to be fully constituted this morning, we are again reminded of the need to review our Constitution to ensure that it evolves in the service of our people. A more significant prompt is the recent Supreme Court ruling in the case of Everton Douglas and others versus the Attorney General, the Minister of National Security, and the Commissioner of Police concerning the detention of men under the then serial and routine use of states of emergency as a crime-fighting tool. Among the important findings of the court were the following. 1, the situation which led to the detention of the detained men did not qualify as an emergency or satisfy the situation in sections 20, subsections 2 and 5 of the Constitution. The second finding, importantly, was that the Emergency Powers Act in its current form does not apply to the current Constitution. The third, that the Emergency Powers Regulation in its current form does not apply to the current Constitution. And because of that, the detention order was unlawful. As it currently stands today, the government has not appealed this decision. Thus, the findings of the court are unchallenged. I raise this case to highlight a collective failure on our part as legislators to recognize the defects in the law, but also a failure in repeatedly voting to extend the states of emergency when the situation did not qualify as such. The oath of allegiance obliges us to uphold and defend the Constitution, not the expedient goals of an executive. Mr. President, I am not, since I hear the leader of opposition business getting impatient, sorry, leader of government business, excuse me. I will reserve. I will reserve additional comments for the debate. But let me just say that the need for constitutional review is impatient of debate. And I confirm that this Mark Golding-led opposition stands ready to fully support efforts at constitutional reform. In fact, the opposition leader called for it in his remarks at the swearing-in ceremony of the President of the Court of Appeal. So, Mr. President, to my family, friends, political colleagues, some of whom would have been here today were it not for the COVID restrictions, thanks for your boundless support that continues to sustain me on this political journey. And thanks to my colleagues and yourself, Mr. President, for welcoming me.
Thank you. And colleagues, I crave your indulgence just to apologize to former members of Parliament, Ascot and Parchment, both of whom are with us this morning, and I ask you to welcome them. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: Ministry Paper number 85 of 2020, an annual report on audited financial statements of the Management Institute of National Development for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual report of the Jamaica Agency of Accreditation for the financial year ending March 2019. Annual report for the Micro Investment Development Agency Limited for the financial year 2019-2020. Annual report of the National Environment and Planning Agency for the year ending March 31, 2010. Annual report of the National Environment and Planning Agency for the year ending March 31, 2011. The National Infant and Young Child Feeding Policy and the National Infant and Young Child Feeding Strategic Action Plan 2019-2014. Annual report for Devon House for the year ending April 29 to March 2020. Annual report of the Water Resources Authority for the year 2016, 2017, and 2017-2018. The Banking Services, Designated Financial Services, Provision of Electronic Retail Payments Services Order 2020 and its resolution, and the Banking Services, Designated Financial Services, Business of Buying and Selling Foreign Exchange Order 2020 and its resolution.
Thank you. Announcements. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honourable Senate, I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 15th day of December 2020, the following bills were passed in the House of Representatives. A bill entitled An Act to Further Amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act, and a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Income Tax Act. I also have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 15th day of December 2020, the House of Representatives agreed to the Senate amendments to a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Shipping Act. Signed, Marisa Dalrymple-Philibert, MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, I beg to take charge of the bills.
A bill shortly entitled the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment No. 2 Act 2020 read a first time, and a bill shortly entitled the Income Tax Amendment Act 2020 read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bills.
Thank you. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as members would be aware, the agenda that has been circulated and planned for today is indeed one which will require economy of time and or steadfastness to the tasks ahead of us. I want to express appreciation to the newly sworn leader of opposition business in the Senate for having agreed for us to table and take matters which had been passed on Tuesday in the interest of the efficiency of our legislative agenda for this term. Mr. President, in that context, it is intended to start today's sitting with the debate on the NHT bill and the Act to Amend the Financial Audit and Administration Act, the debates on which will be led by Senator Hill. We will then proceed with the debate on the Income Tax Act and also take the banking service orders, which will be led by myself, and then the Evidence Act, the amendments to the Evidence Act and to the Dangerous Drugs Act will be taken together, led by Senator Samuda. That is the order of today's items. And again, I express appreciation to the other side for having agreed to the additional matters which are being tabled and taken today. With that, Mr. President.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. President, Leader. And Mr. President, given that the two bills that I'm going to lead are related in terms of their financial matters, they are being done because of the effects of the pandemic on our economy, I'm going to ask you and take your leave, Mr. President, to present them together, although in committee they will be discussed and dealt with separately. I start with the NHT, an Act to Amend the National Housing Trust Act 2020. Mr. President, today is a special day in that it's the last session of the Senate in a year that has been enormously exceptional. Today we have a formidable agenda of bills, and to commence the debate on this in this noble Senate on the bill entitled An Act to Amend the National Housing Trust Act. This Act, Mr. President, seeks to amend the National Housing Trust Act to allow the continuation of the special distributions from the National Housing Trust to central government. Mr. President, the government of Jamaica has relied on a contribution from the NHT of $11.4 billion per year since 2013 for the attainment of its fiscal targets under the Jamaica's Economic Reform Program. Government revenues are expected to decline by at least $84 billion for fiscal year 2021 or 2020 to 2021. Indeed, Mr. President, for the first 7 months of this fiscal year to October 2020, government revenues have declined by $60 billion. So both the actual and projected declines are direct results of the COVID-19 pandemic. An important requirement for a quick economic recovery will be for us to be able to continue almost as normal without compromising macroeconomic stability, nor too significantly to interrupt the government's investment program, nor the services to our Jamaican people. So, Mr. President, in other words, if we had to respond by either significantly interrupting the investment program of the government for multiple years or by curtailing services being offered, we would prolong the time to economic recovery. For these reasons, Mr. President, due to the extremely severe economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are really obliged to continue the contributions from the NHT. Now, Mr. President, is not the time to stop those NHT contributions to the government of Jamaica. In fact, because of the pandemic, which is something unusual for over 100 years, we propose an extension of the NHT contributions across the economic recovery period. That is, for another 5 years. Mr. President, in 2014, the first year of the NHT drawdown, the NHT contributed $11.4 billion to the central government and invested approximately $21.5 billion in housing expenditure. That is, in 2014, the NHT, Mr. President, spent almost twice as much on housing as it contributed to the government. It's good to know that, almost twice as much. Mr. President, I am pleased to report that the almost 2-to-1 ratio has exploded on the upside. This year, despite the NHT contribution of $11.4 billion to central government, the NHT is spending approximately $50 billion on housing expenditure. Today, the NHT spends nearly, Mr. President, today, NHT spends nearly 5 times as much on housing expenditures as it does on the contribution to the government. This is up from 2 times when the drawdown first occurred. So we are making progress in spite of the NHT helping the government and the people of Jamaica in a time of pandemic. So, Mr. President, to put things and the NHT contributions in their proper perspective, as time goes on, the annual contribution is a smaller and smaller component of NHT's cash flows. That's not to say those contributions are treated lightly. Not at all. But I wanted to provide a proper perspective to those numbers. We are, yes, getting from NHT, but the amount of the cash flow that we're taking is smaller, and the amount of houses, the amount of money spent on houses is significantly larger. Therefore, the objective of the NHT is being kept while we use this money at this time during an extremely extraordinary pandemic period. The NHT's cash flows, Mr. President, from which it finances expenditures, including housing expenditure, consist of contributions from employers and employees, interest on mortgages, repayments of mortgage principal, sale of assets, and returns on investments. In 2014, the $11.4 billion contribution was 29% of the NHT's total cash flow. That's in 2014, 29%. Upon renewal of the annual $11.4 billion drawdown, Mr. President, based on projections available, the $11.4 billion next year will constitute only 11% of the NHT's cash flow. Again, from 29% in 2014 down by almost a third to 11% in the coming year. Mr. President, next year's withdrawal from the NHT will constitute only a third of the Trust's cash flow compared to the percentage amount of the NHT's cash flow that was withdrawn in 2014. So, again, as time goes on, it is less and less onerous to the NHT when compared to the amount being spent on housing expenditure, when compared that amount to the overall inflows into the NHT. Mr. President, even after renewal of the drawdown, the NHT's program to spend $58 billion on housing expenditure in the next financial year, 2021 to 2022, based on projections, and $65 billion in the following year, 2022-2023. Remember, they were spending a small amount of that in 2014. To put that in context, next year, Mr. President, even after the drawdown, the NHT's housing expenditure is programmed to be 2.6 times, 260% in other words, more than what the NHT spent on housing in 2016-2017. And in the following year, 22-23, the NHT is expected to spend on housing expenditure 3 times, 300%, as much as it did in 2016-2017. And remember, we jacked it up in 2016-2017, in spite of the drawdowns that it has to give to the government. Mr. President, the core purpose of the NHT is being enhanced and improved. Progress is being made to achieve its main objective, that of building many more housing solutions for the deserving Jamaican people. That's the objective. We're keeping it, enhancing it, and making it bigger. Mr. President, even with the drawdown, housing expenditure next year will be, as I said, 2.6 times what housing expenditure was in the first term of the Andrew Holness administration. And the following year, it will be 3 times as much as in the first year, according to projections that have been provided. With that volume of expenditure, the government will remain focused on solving the market failure and bring more housing solutions that Jamaicans can afford to the market. That is very important and continuing objective of this Andrew Holness administration. Mr. President, despite the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, the government maintains its commitment to fiscal discipline, economic reform, and a return to resilient growth. Permit me, Mr. President, as I will now do a clause-by-clause presentation of the specific provisions of the bill. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, Senators. The bill, which was tabled before this Honourable Senate on December 11, 2020, comprises 3 clauses which make provisions as follows. Clause 1 addresses the preliminary issues of the bill. It sets out the short title. construction and commencement of the Act, which is cited as the National Housing Trust Amendment Special Provisions Act 2020, and, Mr. President, must be read and construed as one with the National Housing Trust Act and all amendments to that Act. Clause 2 addresses the power of the National Housing Trust to provide special support for fiscal consolidation and seeks to amend Section 4 of the National Housing Trust Act to allow the Trust to provide financing up to a maximum annual amount of $11.4 billion for fiscal consolidation in respect of each of the financial years ending respectively on March 31, 2022, March 31, 2023, March 31, 2024, March 31, 2025, and March 31, 2026. This clause also sets out that such financing may be provided by way of distribution, grant, or otherwise, as the minister responsible for finance may determine. Clause 3, Mr. President, outlines the duration of the Act, provides that the Act shall continue in force until March 31, 2026, and will then expire. Memorandum of Objectives and Reasons. Mr. President, it's all there on the bill, and it seems that my colleagues are quite willing to work with.
Senator, I know you want to bring yourself to the attention of the new leader, but
Mr. President, you should protect me from such distraction. It is quite large,
Senator Brown
must therefore protect
Senator
me from
Brown
such
is taking out his
distraction.
position. Just you concentrate on your work.
Mr. President, as the members of this Honourable Senate would have observed, the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons explain the purpose of the bill and gives an overview of the necessity and scope of the bill. The Memorandum of Objects and Reasons speaks to the severe impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had and continues to have on the financial resources of the government. It outlines that the economic policy response of the government necessitated budgetary support being allotted to new activities, including the government's COVID-19 allocation of resources for employees care program. The Memorandum of Objects and Reasons, Mr. President, indicates that it is estimated that the discontinuation of the $11.4 billion contribution provided by the National Housing Trust during the present economic climate will result in a further reduction in the government's financial resources and will impair the government's ability to implement social well-being measures required to stabilize the economy and facilitate economic growth. Mr. President, in closing, the measure which we are seeking to implement by the enactment of this piece of legislation must be viewed within the context of the need for the government to continue to provide special programs to help to alleviate the hardships being experienced by our citizens as a result of the impact of the pandemic. And so, Mr. President, I ask this Honourable Senate to give due consideration and support to this bill. I took leave of the President, Madam Senator. She's very excited in a very, very colorful and attractive dress. But let me continue, Mr. President. I seek to commence before this Honourable Senate the bill entitled the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment No. 2 Act 2020, an important law to allow for automatic adjustments that are to be made to the fiscal balance when the requirements to achieve the fiscal targets are suspended in keeping with the fiscal responsibility framework. Mr. President, before conducting the clause-by-clause examination of the bill, I must remind this Honourable Senate that the fiscal responsibility framework was enacted first in February 2020 through amendments to the Financial Administration and Audit and the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Acts, and they were further amended in 2014. Mr. President, these amendments establish binding fiscal rules aimed at enhancing fiscal discipline and facilitating marked improvements in public financial management. However, these rules were amended in 2014 with the setting of a debt to gross domestic product ceiling of 60% for the specified public sector by March 31, 2026, and the requirement for a fiscal balance consistent with this target to be attained and maintained each year. Mr. President, the new Section 48CA of the FAA Act introduced automatic adjustments which detailed how any deviation in the fiscal balance that caused a negative balance ought to be recorded in the notional account and how it was to be treated. This Honourable Senate will recall that earlier this year we approved the suspension of the fiscal rules for fiscal 2020-2021 following amendments to the FAA Act which expanded on the circumstances that could trigger suspension of the fiscal rules, which included, among other things, a periodic disaster within the meaning of Section 20 of the Constitution of Jamaica, or an order published under Section 26 of the Disaster Risk Management Act, declaring the whole or any part of Jamaica to be a disaster area or a threatened area, or made under Section 16 of the Public Health Act. Mr. President, it is also important that this Honourable Senate recalls that as a result of the disruption to economic activity, the real GDP for 2020-2021 was lowered to a contraction of 5.1%, which was again lowered to a contraction of 7.9%, even though we believe that the contraction will be closer to 10% this year. The unprecedented fiscal burden imposed by the pandemic derailed the trajectory to achieve a debt to GDP of 60% by the initially legislated timeline of fiscal 25-26 and a new timeline of fiscal 2027-28 was approved by that other place and the Senate. Mr. President, the required fiscal response in fiscal year 2021 to address the impact of COVID-19 pandemic generated deviation in the central government fiscal balance of minus 4.1% of GDP. We originally targeted a surplus of the specified public sector of about 0.6% of GDP, but instead will have a deficit of 3.5% of GDP. Mr. President, Jamaica's economic position would be much, much worse, as indeed it is in other countries, if it weren't for the fact that we started the fiscal year with a substantial reserve of cash in the government's coffers, representing about 3% of GDP. In other words, Mr. President, good management since the Holness government administration came in gave us a cash bundle, and it's the absolute truth, gave us a cash bundle of 3% of GDP that, Senator Brown, if we didn't have that, we would be sucking salt right now. And that's the truth, my colleague senators. The automatic correction mechanism requires adjustment measures in the coming fiscal year of at least 1.5% of GDP in conformity with Section 48CA(1)(b) of the Act, and further adjustment measures of 2.6% of GDP to be applied in the ensuing year. These adjustments would be burdensome, painful, and would require fiscal balance and primary balance of 0.7% and 6.3% of GDP for the upcoming fiscal year, and a primary balance of 8.7% of GDP in the following year. I am on record writing, as I was as the lead columnist in the Financial Gleaner, week after week, saying the 7.5 primary balance figure that we had agreed with the IMF was really tough. Well, to think of 7.5 versus 8.7 after a pandemic, we would be wiped. So we have to make this change. Mr. President, this is the first occasion on which the legislated recovery mechanism is being utilized. It really is regrettable, but unavoidable, that it's being utilized in a year where we have a 1-in-100-year event that has caused such a massive rearrangement in just year one of this 5-year period. So, Mr. President, the law speaks to cumulative deviation when the cumulative deviation passes 3 points, 3%. It was never envisioned that we would have a year in which the deviation was 4.1% of GDP, which is $80+ billion. That's the deviation in just year one, not in 2 years as the law had asked. Mr. President, in fact, 3.5% in 2 years. We had 4.1% deviation, negative deviation in year one. Mr. President, you will remember the debate and queries that surrounded this clause earlier in this Senate when the Act was passed earlier this year. Mr. President, given the required level in the law today, we believe it would be counterproductive to go ahead as the law is written. It is for this reason and against this background that these amendments are being considered to the FAA Act at this time. The amendments will facilitate the pursuit of an adjustment path that's consistent with achieving the 60% target in 2027-2028 alongside gradual economic recovery. There are many people who believe that this is a really tight schedule, but the government has a commitment to get back on track and reduce our debt, which will become even more burdensome if we don't manage it properly. So, Mr. President, the proposed amendments seek to lengthen the time period allotted for recovery as well as to reduce the minimum required adjustments in any 1 year. Mr. President, that this week, in fact, S&P released their update on Jamaica, where they are maintaining the credit rating of Jamaica's long-term bond at B+. As a way of reminder, Mr. President, yes, thank you. They are maintaining at B+, Mr. President, unheard of when we got that B+ rating some months ago. As a way of reminder, Mr. President, S&P rating Jamaica's long-term bonds at B+ earlier this year, or late last year, and that was the highest rating Jamaica has ever received from S&P in 20 years. So whoever were before us never got there. We fought hard and got there, and they are maintaining that rating. And that's something to be proud of. It is significant, Mr. President, that in the midst of the pandemic and in the midst of a projected 10% contraction of GDP, that S&P has seen it fit to maintain and affirm Jamaica's credit rating at B+. This is in this period. I don't hear nothing. I don't hear nothing. You understand, say, this is big, and they have maintained it, and Mr. President, really and truly, Jamaicans should be proud of this, and it's a good job that has been done. This is due to the fact that we've managed to preserve economic stability. You think about that all through this time. The Jamaican dollar has traded within a relatively narrow range. Today it's around a high point of that range, meaning Jamaican value of about 144, 145. That economic stability has been maintained. Policy and fiscal credibility have been maintained and are projected into the future. But, Mr. President, risks still exist. We have to ensure that the growth that we expect for the next year is materialized. But it's very good news that they released a report affirming Jamaica's credit rating at B+. Mr. President, I will now do a clause-by-clause presentation of the bill. Mr. President, Clause 1 addresses preliminary issues of the bill. It sets out the short title, Construction and Commencement of the Act, which is cited as the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment, number 2, Act of 2020, and must be read and construed as one with the Financial Administration and Audit Act. Clause 2, Mr. President, amends Section 48 CA 1A, which addresses the adjustments to be made regarding the cumulative deviations recorded in the national account to range from 1.5% of GDP to less than 3% of GDP, instead of the current cumulative deviation recorded in the notional account to range from 1.5% of GDP to less than 3.5% of GDP. Clause 2 amends Section 48 CA1B for the cumulative deviations recorded in the notional account to exceed 3% of GDP. Section 48 CA1B2 is to be amended to allow for an upward adjustment of the fiscal balance of at least 1%. It was previously 1.5%. This clause further amends Section 48 CA 1F and provides that the cumulative deviations in paragraphs A and B of the FAA Principal Act to be corrected for over 3 financial years and over 4 financial years, respectively. Mr. President, Clause 2 also provides an amendment to Section 48 CA2, which indicates that there shall be a recalibration to occur at the end of a period of correction as stipulated under Section 48 CA 1F and in compliance with Section 48 C 1A and B, which may be suspended in accordance with Section 48 C 2. Finally, Mr. President, the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons explains the purpose of the bill and provides an overview of the necessity and scope of the bill. The Memorandum of Objects and Reasons speaks to the fiscal response required to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the fiscal balance of the central government of minus 3% of GDP. It speaks minus 3.7% of GDP. It speaks to the 3.7% of GDP because that's the central government. In the fiscal policy paper that was printed prior to tabling of the second supplementary, that was the figure. By the time the second supplementary was tabled, you will recall we lowered the fiscal deficit from 3.1% to 3.5%. So the fiscal deviation is 4.1% of GDP. It outlines that the automatic correction mechanism under Section 48 CA1B of the FAA Act is required to adjust the measures in the fiscal year 2021-2022 to at least 1.5% of GDP and a further adjustment measure of 2.2% of GDP in fiscal year 2022-2023. By conclusion, Mr. President, the amendments we seek are to facilitate, on one hand, the pursuit of an adjustment path that's consistent with 60% target, and on the other, to support gradual economic recovery. The passing of this bill, entitled the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment No. 2 Act 2020, is critical to lengthening the time period for recovery and to reducing the minimum required adjustment. However, the adjustment required will still be quite challenging. Mr. President, the intention is never to come to amend the FAA Act at any point that things seem difficult. That's not the intention. This year, however, Mr. President, is not an ordinary year with just ordinary difficulty. This is the year of a 1-in-100-year pandemic problem, with the worst economic decline in Jamaica's entire history, in the context of a global economic decline of historic proportions not seen at least for 90 years. That is the context in which we are seeking this amendment, and the spirit of it is that it is an amendment it's an amendment for which we wish to have the support of the opposition, because this fiscal responsibility law is more important than any particular political side. It is the law that protects and underpins the security of Jamaica's fiscal accounts for all Jamaicans. So, Mr. President, I seek the support of the members of this honourable Senate in passing this bill. Thank you.
Senator Brown, I guess everything you had to say, you said it while Senator Hill was presenting. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Hill. Senator Fraser-Binns.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Mr. President. Is this better? Yes. And I promise you that I will not be as short as my friend, Senator Irvin Hill. After all, it is Sarah's day, so I will not be too long. But, Mr. President, you will imagine that I would certainly want to make a contribution, however brief, to this request to amend the National Housing Trust Act and the FAA. It is actually Senator Hill, perhaps design, perhaps coincidentally, that we are debating the National Housing Trust Amendment Act and the FAA at the same time, because fiscal responsibility goes hand in hand with the request for $11.4 billion withdrawal from the NHT every year for the next 5 years. And if one is to agree that yes, We understand COVID. Go ahead. What is important is that fiscal management and responsibility is evident. And I'll speak a little bit more about that. And so, Mr. President, I wish to make some brief comments on this amendment. And I want to start off, Senator Hill, by telling you that we're on this side, we're not opposed to the amendment to the NHT Act. But what we do know is that lessons can be learned about how we treat with matters that impact on the life and the welfare of all Jamaicans. That there are some things that go beyond color politics. And the best interest of Jamaica is seminal and is critical. And this is one such thing. Mr. President, as you're aware, the NHT was established in 1976. Right, Senator Brown? Yeah. With a mandate to provide housing to Jamaicans and to increase the housing stock. I had the opportunity to look back at the Act and to remind myself of the objects and the purpose, and I see Senator Graham listening, of the NHT. And I mean, I want to share with you what it says. It says that the functions of the trust shall be to add and to improve the existing supply of housing by promoting housing projects to such extent that may from time to time be approved by the minister. And the other one that I want to share is encouraging and stimulating improved methods of production of houses. And at B, to enhance the usefulness of the funds of the trust by promoting greater efficiency in the housing sector. And at section 2, it says, at 4.2, it goes on to say that in exercising its function, the trust shall have power to provide finances for development projects, social services, and physical infrastructure for communities developed under the projects. And there are some other tasks that it can go. And why do I reference the Act? I reference the Act because Senator Hill spoke so much about what the NHT has done, and I want to just pause to congratulate the National Housing Trust and the management of the NHT, the staff of the NHT. Someone who has to interface with NHT, I can tell you that they are one of the best run government entity in this country. And you can literally say to a client, by X time you'll get a response. And barring something unforeseeable, you're going to get a response. And I want to commend the management and staff of NHT. And I am told we have directors here, and so I want to big them up. But really, just to congratulate them for the work that they do. And because they are cognizant of how their work impacts people's lives, I think as legislators, we too must be cognizant how our actions affect NHT and thereby affect their ability to impact positively on people's lives. And so we must ask ourselves, Senator Hill, whether this plan to withdraw funds from the NHT falls within the objects, the mandate, the purpose of the Act. The clear answer is no. And it is for that reason why we're here. And it's not the first time that we're here. We have been here maybe 4 times, Senator Brown, under successive administrations. The fact is that much more can be done with the funds from the National Housing Trust to ensure that more Jamaicans have affordable housing. Mr. when we look at the objective of the Act, which is to provide housing solutions, there are so many NHT schemes as we know them, which have fallen into disrepair, that are in dire need of upgrade, Senator Cavan Gale. So we need to ask ourselves, can some of this money, or should more of this money, or why is it that more of this money is not channeled into renewing these NHT schemes, into upgrading these NHT schemes, into building more affordable housing? I really just commented on how good the service at NHT is, and I really said without reservations. But I have had to ask the NHT about a development that has been undertaken by them, which in my mind is out of the reach of the normal Joe. The NHT has to review and revise its projects to ensure that houses that are built by the NHT are not in competition with houses built by private developers, because those houses must be at a cheaper rate. Generally they are, but increasingly we're seeing some NHT schemes or NHT developments that are being priced almost at private sector price. And so for the directors in here that sit at the NHT, it is perhaps something that we need to look, that you need to look at to ensure that as we go through the spending and as we seek to make housing, we seek to make more housing available, that they're not just available, but they're accessible by ensuring that they are priced accordingly. So we have to ask ourselves, Senator Gale, about whether we can use some of these funds to upgrade the housing. How can the NHT play a lead role in an integration of what we call brownfield and greenfield development housing? Because when we do that, Your Worship, what will happen is that the prices will fall. You will have a greater number of options to choose from. But importantly, what you're doing as well is that you are renewing some of our inner city communities. So there's a particular community, for example, of which I'm familiar because I worship in that area, in the central Kingston area. And I'm quite sure the mayor, his worship, the mayor is very familiar with that area. How can we ensure that communities in that area, it's called the St. Matthew's Anglican Church. How can we ensure, Your Worship, that the combination, and I say to you because you are the first citizen of Kingston and St. Andrew, but I also say to you because you are connected to that area, and you know why. But the truth though, Mr. President, is how can we ensure that there is an integration of brownfield and greenfield area in housing in that community? Because you will appreciate, as we have spoken many times, the impact it will have, not just on housing solution, but just on creating communities. Yes, but creating communities and building worth. And so I am proposing that as we consider this drawdown from the NHT, that we also look to see how the abundance of funds at the NHT is used to improve persons' lives specific to the objective for which it was established. And this is important, Your Worship, because in spite of the efforts of successive governments, yours included, to make NHT assistance available to persons at the lower quintile of the society, there are still many persons who pay NHT contributions and just will not be able, will just not be able to utilize it because they just can't pay it back. It's just what reality is. And so perhaps that integrated approach will help. But the other thing as well that we may want to consider, and sometimes Senator Sinclair, when he makes his contribution, likes to go back in history, and he said, I pick up this manifesto from the PNP and it says X, Y, and Z. I am going to invite you, Senator Sinclair, to pick up the manifesto of the PNP of 2020. No, man, serious. I'm making a proposal for your consideration. And in it, you will see, Senator Gale, a plethora of recommendations that you can implement, because it's not just PNP and JLP, no. It's about Jamaican. And if the opposition puts a proposal that can benefit, then make a rally around it and work with it. We've done it before, and this is one proposal. So, you know, we talk about, Senator Gale, in our manifesto, we spoke about ways in which we can use the NHT to benefit Jamaicans, particularly the neediest. And I'm proposing that we can look back at some of those recommendations. Mr. President, yes, and we have to commend Senator Crawford because he was integral in the preparation of the manifesto. Mr. President, the National Housing Trust has become a critical player in our economy. And as I said earlier, successive governments have sought to draw down from the fund to fill budgetary gaps for reasons. In 2013, the then PNP, Portia Simpson Miller-led government, sought and successfully withdrew funds from the NHD for budgetary reasons, having inherited an economy that was on the brink of collapse. And what transpired then is a lesson for all of us. Because if we, on this side, were like some persons in 2013, we could say that the government, led by Andrew Holness, Prime Minister, attempt to withdraw funds from the trust is unconstitutional and a deprivation of contributors' property.
Who is those some people?
But, Mr. President, we will not say that. We, Mr. President, will not say that because we recognize, no, Senator Sinclair, we will not say that the Prime Minister, Andrew Holness' attempt to withdraw funds from the NHD is unconstitutional and a deprivation of the contributors' property. We're not going to say it. Right? We're not going to say it because we recognize, Senator Sinclair, the untold hardship that COVID has brought to Jamaica and the world. We're not going to say it because we know the thousands of Jamaicans who are eagerly waiting on the government to do something to improve their lives. We're not going to say it is unconstitutional. We're not going to go to court because we on this side put Jamaica first.
All the time. All the time.
We're not going to say it because we understand, and some of us experience firsthand, the shortages of resources in our hospitals. We understand, we experience the downturn in the economy. And we know for a fact that thousands of Jamaicans have been laid off, and this has a direct impact on the availability of funds to the government. So we're not going to say it. So, whereas we're not going to contemplate any kind of legal action, as others did in 2013, we cannot, however, as responsible citizens, as NHT contributors, as a responsible opposition, turn a blind eye to certain realities. I said it earlier, but I'm compelled to say it again, Senator Gale, that the National Housing Trust is people money. held in trust for them. It's the contributors' money held in trust for them. And the government, by law, as it has done, is expanding the purpose for which the funds can be used. No problem. But as it does that, what is unequivocal is that there is a need for accountability and transparency in how the monies will be used. Mr. President, if we are true to ourselves, and if we create the scenario of the government being a borrower and the NHU being a borrowee, so the government is going, for example, to a bank to borrow money for whatever project, the lender is going to want to know the history of the person who's borrowing. So they're going to do maybe a credit check, credit rating, but whatever term you want to use, what is going to be done is that they're going to look at your history and how you have managed funds or managed your business in the past for them to determine whether you're a high risk or not. And so, as we embark upon this withdrawal of funds from the government, from the NHT, we have to look back at the track record of the government of Jamaica. Has the government of Jamaica, in how it has handled funds, been responsible? I know Senator Hill going to say, yes, we get credit rating, and I know you're going to say that. But the truth is that the government has not been prudent in how it has managed the financial resources of the people. So while we consider and prepare for this drawdown, Senator Hill, we are forced to consider the history and the track record of the government in how it spends people's money. And you can talk about past government, but what we have now is a borough led, the team or the CEO of the borough is one Mr. Andrew Holness. And we have to look at how he and his team has managed the resources over the years. So we have to consider the Caribbean Maritime University and how that was managed, people's money. We have to consider HART and how that was managed, people's money. We have to consider the debushing scandal and how it was managed, people's money. In all of these instances, what was missing was application of good faith in how people's monies were handled. And so, Mr. President, if I was a banker to whom the government comes, noting the interests of Jamaicans, I would give them money. But I would deem him high risk. I would deem the government high risk. The good thing is that you can start off as high risk, but through proper management and accountability, you can change, you can evolve. And I am hoping that as we end 2020 and embark on 2021, that the accountability, the transparency, the honesty and the openness in the use of state resources will be beyond question. That as we draw down on these funds for the next 5 years, that we can be very clear that the funds were used for the intended purposes. That is important, because that is how you're going to build trust. I understand, as stated in the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons, that, and with reason too, that the need for this comes because of the effects of COVID, and that is not a debatable issue. But we must also be minded that the Administrator General's report had some concerns and some recommendations let us implement those recommendations so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the distribution of care packages. That is how we build trust. So, Mr. President, as I close, I want to say that in the season of giving, not only am I in red, but we are truly giving. And so the opposition, careful what you wish for. I have a nice orange jacket for you. The opposition, the opposition will support this amendment. We're giving it to you as a Christmas gift on condition that we ensure that transparency, accountability, and openness become the hallmark of how we move forward in 2021. We need to be accountable not just to the parliamentarians, but to their conditional gifts, you know that, but to the Jamaican people. And as your Prime Minister, your leader rather should say, likes to say, several times he said it, including debate, Master said to him, and I'm encourage all of you, I told him name, man, that do the right thing. With that, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Gill.
Thank you, President. You know, Senator Fraser-Binns, in regards to this bill today, I can speak as a parliamentarian. I can speak as a member of the board, but first and foremost, as one who represents workers who are contributors to the scheme. And let me thank you for supporting this legislation. It appears in your closing that your generosity has no bounds. Let me start by indicating, because you raised a concern about the transparency and accountability that is going to be required in 2021. There is no doubt in my mind about the transparency and accountability of this administration. It has been demonstrated, there has been confidence in it, and it will continue. You know, in 2013, when you had this first drawdown of this nature, it was met by resistance. In fact, an individual who was self-employed took the matter to court, and the court ruled. That's a description of the gentleman by the court. So not an opposition. As a contributor to the National Housing Trust. And the court ruled. And we are standing by the ruling of the court. So if you said what you were going to say, I want to use the opportunity to joining you in commending the National Housing Trust for the tremendous work that it has done. And, you know, when you take these drawdowns from an institution of that nature, it must raise some concerns about the continuity of meeting the strategic mandate of the organization. The good thing about it is that the management and the boards of that organization continue to be standing up to the task in meeting the objectives. And we'll always say that, you know, that the primary objectives of the National Housing Trust is to provide a housing solution, affordable housing solution for its contributors. And I want to say that a vast majority of contributors have benefited over many years because of the support of the National Housing Trust. President, there are a number of things, that the Trust would have done in the past few years. In 2017, they commissioned a strategic review. One of the first things was to look at the lowest income band. At that time, it was those earning $70,500 a week. And to increase that income band to $15,000 to allow those who are earning below that $15,000 to acquire loans at no interest rate. No interest rate. It went on to ensure that those who applied for schemes, NHT schemes, you would get 100% financing, which is commendable. It increased the home improvement loan that was for many years at 1.5 million. You get a solution, you get access to your loan, but you can't get an improvement until a particular defined period, and you could only get up to 1.5 million. In 2019, they moved that to 2.5 million. And they also increased the housing loan limit from 2 million to 2.5 million, and increased the value of the home grant from 1.5 to 2.5 million for those lower income earners so that they can qualify for at least the studio. President, they also created what you call mortgage interest rate concessions for persons with disabilities, and Senator Morris is not here. But for those persons to use $150,000 to retrofit their dwelling. Mr. President, the public sector workers would have benefited tremendously from various concessions that would have come out of decisions from the National Housing Trust. There are those persons who you get the loan. You can't acquire a home improvement loan until a defined period of 15 years after your first loan, your loan. The public sector workers qualify for that after 10 years. Mr. President, the trust, will continue to embark on strategies for more affordable housing. Outside of that, and Senator Fraser-Binns, you spoke about that social dimension. And this is something that has been called upon on a number of occasions. The trust, would have been doing some special projects, upgrade infrastructure of past schemes. In 2017, they would have gone through a major development of renewal in communities. Mr. President, they also work with various agencies, the National Water Commission and the UDC for renewal community projects, renovation from many police stations, refurbishing of many infirmaries, various rehabilitation programs as part of its community renewal projects. Mr. President, the National Housing Trust continue to evolve. And this drawdown that is being sought today is coming at one of the most challenging periods that we're dealing with. this pandemic has created havoc on not only the world, but Jamaica. And so the funds are badly needed now to lend social support. It is critical. And contributors and the society must be concerned about the use of these funds. And one of the things that I would recommend is that there is some feedback to the public around the use of these funds to restore confidence in the process. President, you know, there are some key changes that are required for the National Housing Trust if it's going to be continuing to sustain its mandate and treat with the demands of the population. You know, there's always this call that poor people want housing, and poor people need houses, and they need dwelling. We must never forget that the statute of the National Housing Trust is very strict in its order. It is defined for contributors. And so, the social housing that is being demanded requires an amendment to the National Housing Trust Act to support this social dimension. It requires that. So it requires a relaxation of the statute in order to lend towards this social support. Mr. President, it also requires some relaxation of procurement rules to allow the trust to be able to support this social initiative, especially, Mr. President, if you want to find, if you want to identify, if you want to be able to give access to the lowest income earners, you have to make amendments to the statutes and provide some relaxation of procurement guidelines to allow for that. President, you know, there is a program that is called the Employer Assisted Housing Program. It was established in 2018. What it does is that those employers who own land can engage in partnership with, outside of that, it would have been an extension of the sugar workers. But in this case, it moved to where you would have some understanding in the mining sector and the tourism sector, those hoteliers, those large hoteliers that own land. It's a program that can be exploited. You see, you only think of a certain period. We have to think about all period and the future.
Senator Brown.
The suggestion that I'm making, however, is that we believe that this program where landowners who are employers can provide critical support in joining with the National Housing Trust to make these lands available for housing solution for its workers. That is critical. Mr. President, I couldn't leave this debate without raising a particular concern that I continue to raise every time I speak on any amendments in regards to the National Housing Trust Act. I want to continue to raise concern about those employers who continue to deduct the contribution from the employee's salary and don't pay it over to the National Housing Trust. It is scandalous. It is irresponsible to deduct.
That doesn't exist.
You know, I thought you would applaud me of being a conscientious for the working class. But you see, those employers that continue to do this practice must be condemned. What they are doing, you know, they are preventing those poor workers from acquiring what they work for. There's no worker that I know that don't work, that don't want to achieve a piece of property, a house or a land. And when you continue to do this, you're denying them that fundamental provision. And one of the things that must be done is that they must be named and shamed. President, this drawdown today is critical. It's important. It will lend support to areas that are needed, areas that are critical. And I want to indicate that I have confidence that the National Housing Trust, notwithstanding this continuous drawdown, is going to continue to meeting its mandate and strategic objective that has been set. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gill. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me move this impediment. Mr. President, let me start with the FAA Act. Senator Hill, it is true that our economy is likely to slip at least 10% this year. It's not the first year of slippage, because the slippage started last year before COVID. It has gathered speed. But the reality is, with a reduced GDP, the boast of 5 in 4 is not even a fleeting illusion. It was a nightmare made up to scare the Jamaican voters. No more 5 in 4 can be spoken of with any credibility. In fact, with a 10% decline in the economy, the only people who can boast about prosperity is those whose foreign assets have grown 5-fold. The prosperity for the people is not there, and it's time for you to admit it, that that's a failed promise. In fact, Mr. President, poverty has gone up, and things are tough on the Jamaican people. Not even the figures the government can stand by anymore, because first they tell you it's a 3% fall, a 5% fall, now a 10% fall in GDP, and soon we'll hear different numbers, worse numbers. And so, Mr. President, I note, for example, that Senator Hill spoke about the fiscal policy paper. It's interesting, Senator Hill, that the last fiscal policy paper omitted the statement from the minister that the figures presented are credible and true. truthful. I don't know if it's because Dr. Phillips raised it in the budget. No, it's not a given. It's not a given. That statement was required to be there.
Yes, it wasn't there.
And it wasn't there. And it's interesting that Dr. Phillips in the budget debate raised it because the minister had done some things which was not in accord with those statements.
Yes.
And I wonder why, Senator Hill, maybe you could answer us, why is that statement no longer in the fiscal policy paper? Because we must be able to trust the numbers given to us by the minister. Was it an oversight? Was it deliberate? It's not there. On this FAA Act, Mr. President, it's important to note, as Senator Hill said, this is not an ordinary year. Not an ordinary year with ordinary problems. What is important for us to appreciate, Mr. President, is something that Senator Hill did not address. One of the benchmarks that the FAA Act addresses is the 9% wage to GDP level. And when the union signed the last contract with the government, the unions expect GDP to grow. So they'll be able to get for the civil servants, the police, the teachers, the nurses, the doctors, an increase in pay. But it seems to me that having said nothing about shifting the 9% wage to GDP, the workers of the public sector are going to be faced with a shrinking GDP. And so a big issue going into 2021 is what about the wages for the doctors, the nurses, the judges, the hospital attendants, the civil servants? How are you going to treat that? And Senator Gale, I hope you will join with me in saying we want to know about that. We want to know how you're going to treat the wage increase for these workers. Because believe me, they are entitled to it and they are deserving of an increase. You just go to the hospitals. Senator Samuda, go to the correctional services. Wherever you go and find the public sector workers, the garbage collectors, they are deserving of an increase. But it seems as if the government has forgotten them. And this is why my wife said something to me. Senator Ilse said, poor people deserve a break. And I'm going to come back to that when I deal with the income tax amendment too. But poor people deserve a break. And I want to see how that break is going to come in respect to the public sector workers and that 9%. Are you going to be maintaining that 9% of GDP as your benchmark for salary increase to the workers? Are we going to be looking at another 5-6 years of wage freeze? The public sector workers want to know that, and you have a duty to tell them, and I'm sure Senator Gale will support me in that request. In respect to the NHT bill, Mr. President, just want to correct some things Senator Hill spoke to before I address the bigger issue I want to raise. Senator Hill, Senator Fraser-Binns have said we're supporting this because we're principled people on this side. We don't just shift them out one day and say our next thing the next day. We look what is good for Jamaica and we do that which is good for Jamaica. Right? So, let me say to you, Senator Hill, when the 2013 spend was required, Senator Gale and I opposed it. in the NHT board. We opposed it. We had several meetings with cabinet, and they convinced us that to stabilize the economy, to avoid new taxes on the poor and on the people in general, that had to be taken. The 11.4 had to be taken for the period. We relented in our opposition because we believe first that NHT money must be used for the NHT law. You know who else supported that view at that time? The current Prime Minister. But instead he threatened, along with Dr. Chang, to take the matter to court. An employee from Belmont Road was used as part of taking the matter to court. I drive by there all the time. In addition, yeah, because I'm not going to turn in. I'm not going to turn. Mr. President, that matter ended against those. A former senator of the JLP, Dennis Meadows, was instrumental to something called Duppy, Duppy or Cappy or whatever. To Duppy? Cappy, oh, sorry. I thought it was Duppy. They took it to court, and they lost. They didn't think about the economy they had wrecked. They didn't think about the difficulty that they had left for the incoming government. But instead what they did was oppose it. Oppose for opposing sake, Mr. President. Because today, between 2017 and today, and 2026, they intend to take $102 billion out of the NHT. How much? $102 billion, 45.6 and 57 billion dollars. They intend to take out of the NHT. But when the former government led by Portia Simpson Miller, Peter Phillips as Prime Minister, Mark Golden leading the legislative committee, and therefore had to come to the NHT board to sell the thing. They opposed it. They opposed 45.6 over 4 years. But they are applauding today, Mr. President, $102 billion over 9 years. Where's the consistency? Somebody would shout hypocrites, because so certainly look hypocritical, their approach. And there's a lesson for us, Mr. President, to learn, that we mustn't just oppose things for opposing sake. We must look at the good for the nation. We must look for the good for the nation. And there's a practice almost in the DNA of my friends on the other side, to oppose for opposing sake. I well recall, Senator Samuda, Portia Simpson Miller proposal to borrow some money from the National Insurance Fund to lend to small business to grow the economy, to collect back that money and strengthen as an investment the National Insurance Fund. And the then opposition opposed it. But when they came to power in 2007, they doubled the amount and lend it from the National Insurance Fund. Only lend it, only double it and lend it. Mr. President, I well recall the opposition to Highway 2000 under PJ Patterson. Yes. Well recall it. A mayor of Spanish Town was disciplined for attending the opening of Highway 2000. What? They opposed for opposed sake. And Senator Braham, oh Lord, productivity gain to the country has come from the opening up of the PJ Patterson Highway. Mr. President, I also well recall how the Portmore Causeway expansion was opposed. Just think today, what would be, Senator Campbell, what would it be like for the entire city of Kingston and St. Andrew if the gridlock in Portmore remained. But they opposed it. Senator Scott Motley, they took the government to the Privy Council.
Yes.
Mr. President, on a point of order.
We expected that.
But you must have expected it. Because it has gone way off. You're gone to the Privy Council now. Mr. President, my point of order is on the basis of relevance, Mr. President.
Let me get up.
He has gone to the Privy Council. I'm asking you, Mr. President, to bring him back into the Senate and to discuss and debate the NHT bill and the FAA Act amendment, and not the Privy Council.
You are incapable of understanding why a principle.
Senator Brown,
yeah.
Don't start with the personal abuse. Do not.
No, there's no personal abuse.
Yes, man. You're telling the man saying incapable of understanding.
But it seems to be true.
But it is not, and you know it. So what you are going to do is maintain the line of argument as it relates to the passage of the bill.
And in doing
I know you are trying to impress the new leader, but take your time.
Mr. President, the standing order requires you not to impute improper motive, but you may want to do it if you want to impress him.
The standing order
you must impute improper
motive. The standing order is that you repeatedly flout. You are reporting, you are citing to me. You have a nerve.
Mr. President, you may want to impress. I am not into the impressing of anybody. I am into impressing of truth upon the government. The truth which says you must stop oppose for opposing sake. You oppose the Portmore Causeway. You oppose the breaking up of the telephone company monopoly.
Mr. President.
When Paulwell did it.
Mr. President,
you oppose the UK prison deal.
I've raised a point of order, and I'm asking.
Hold on. Mr. President.
Yes.
On a point of order. Given that I was the lead person on the Portmore toll road case, I want to correct Senator Brown. The matter was not brought to court against the expansion. It was about charging the people of Portmore to go home every day and to come to work into Kingston. So please, I am asking you, sir, to refrain from misleading as to what we oppose to.
Go to the President.
Senator Rodriguez, Senator Sinclair. Senator Brown.
I'm on the point of relevance, Mr. President. And I'm raising the point.
Mr. President, the point I'm making about this bill is those who wish to forget history will repeat it. And I don't want that to happen. We must remind them that they oppose the prison deal. We must remind them that they oppose the urban renewal tax plan that we brought here and for which the income tax amendment speaks to. Petro-Carib, oh my golly, Arbin Hill. So they oppose these things for opposing sake. Mr. President, let us be clear. This 11.4, having dealt with the lack of principle by some on that side. The 11.4, I agree with those who say it's not going to impact the operational activities of the NHT. I want to put in context that 11.4. But Senator, let me just make this clear to you. In 2014, the housing spend was dictated by the IMF agreement and the need to fix the economy, and which you know boast. But for us acting prudently with fiscal responsibility, we would not have been able to rescue the Jamaican economy and put it in a place where you can boast about it today. So understand, we could have spent more, but there was a requirement under the IMF agreement, which incidentally the prior one you all failed. Never even turned up for the test. So let us not go there. Let us not go there. Mr. President, I'm over here. The will of the people is not a permanent state. It changes. And it will change and put us back over there sometime. And sooner rather than later. Mr. President, the 11.4 essentially came from what used to be the employer's contribution. It's approximate the employer's contribution. Contribution which would be refunded after 25 years. And then the law was changed which says it becomes non-refundable. So essentially what you're doing is taking the employers or the equivalent of the employer's contribution and putting it into the consolidated fund. That's what you're doing. And it's not COVID that caused you to do it. It is a philosophy that has been adopted that that's what you was going to do. COVID become an excuse. COVID has become an excuse to do it. Right? That's what so happened. So, Mr. President, the economy, they said, is meeting its targets, it's meeting its revenue target and so forth. Why then go to the NHT? Because really, COVID is an excuse. But I want to go beyond COVID. And I note you mentioned Standard & Poor, but you forgot to mention that Standard & Poor has said, be careful, you could be downgraded. That's why I asked you, just tell the whole story, right? And that is why the greener cartoon of the minister painting the sunshiny view while the people saw the S&P doom and gloom. Mr. President, this money, we're not opposing it. My concern is how it will be spent. And I have at least two proposals to make in spending it. First one, Mr. President, I don't know if you heard the wailing of a mother whose child had died from a fire recently. That fire took place at a place on Spanish Town Road called Palm Grove Court. Senator Gill, you and I know that Palm Court Grove was built by the NHT and probably still owned by the NHT. So in our NHT house, this lady gas stove explodes. She got burned up. She died. Her mother was on television and reported on social media making a plea. President, that plea lasted 6 minutes and 26 seconds. It pulled at my heart. I believe that after prayer every day, in the Senate and in the other place, that video, that plea, the wailing, the lamentation of that mother, Delcita Anderson, should be played for all 84 of us to hear what the people think of us. I'm not sure the standing order will allow me to play that video. What I did, Mr. President, and I crave your indulgence, is to ask that the video be transcribed so I can share with us some of the words of Ms. Delcita Anderson crying to us for help over the death of her daughter. She said, "Me lost my picnic dead. The politicians them on the two sides, both PNP and JLP, there is no help to Jamaican citizens." Then the uncle came in, and the uncle said, "She has gone, but it's very sad time for the family, and I believe she take too long to leave. That's what the problem is. It's going into 3 weeks now. It's too long, too long." That will be our cry. And there's no burn unit in Jamaica at no government facilities. It's a shame. That's why it takes so long, and she lost her life. But my niece, Kerry Ann Collins, love you. You're gone, but my love for you will never die. And then her mother, Delcita, came back in that video, and she said, "Me lost my picnic Me picnic dead. The politician them, the two sides, both PNP and JLP, them is no help to Jamaican citizens. Them is no help. When voting time come, you see them pack up at your yard and look vote. For your vote for them turn Prime Minister. Them is no help to Jamaica. No help. Them don't care about them people. Jesus, me picnic gone. Me picnic gone. Mighty God, mighty God. But God knows everything that is best. I call upon the Prime Minister for Jamaica for many weeks to come to me cry. And him don't come to me cry. Me picnic dead. Me picnic dead. I ball out for the Prime Minister for come to me cry. Me ball out for the two sides them. Nobody come to me cry. Ministry of Health, me cry out to them. And them not come to me cry. Nobody care about me. Because them rich and them have them money and them not care about nobody. Yeah, some people don't care about poor people because them take poor people for nothing at all. Them take with a puppy show and me picnic dead. My breadwinner dead. My picnic care for me. She love me. I'm a breadwinner and my picnic gone. But God knows. And the sister chimed in. Sister said she could live. 12 days she lived for. From the 27th November she get burned. From the 27th and no help at all. But just through them can fly out, go get them big help and get big health care. The health system are idiot out there. No health care, not there Jamaica for people, poor people. Not even extra can get. And them have official and neck and tire fly out, go England and Europe or get them health care and people there suffer. This could have happened to other people else picnic. Anybody picnic could get burned and don't care to suffer. And they went on. I don't need to, but I urge all us to go listen to the voice of Delcita Anderson speaking for the poor people of Jamaica. And she blamed both sides. And do I agree with her? Yes, I do agree with her. And so, Mr. President, there's no burn unit. But I know of at least 3 workers in a bauxite company over several years who got serious burn. And some of them, thanks to the benevolence of the bauxite company, flew them out for treatment abroad. I am aware, Senator Gale, as you are, of the fire in Mandeville, Senator Bunting, earlier this year, where a worker died from burn. I'm aware, through my wife, of a church sister, who ran into a house fire, to save her adopted child. She had to spend weeks, months in hospital here. No burn unit. And it has been said, Mr. President.
Mr. President, a point of order, sir. Yeah, I sat and I indulged and listened as Senator Brown lamented about no burns unit being at any of the public hospitals in Jamaica. As far as I know, there is a definite working burns unit at the University of the West Indies, University Hospital of the West Indies. Burns patients are also treated at almost every major hospital, including KPH, Spanish Town, Cornwall Regional, Mapen Hospital. I did not interrupt earlier because you were relating the laments of a citizen of Jamaica that my heart goes out to. And I think we all recognize the very dire state that that family has had to face with. But recognize that this was a complicated clinical situation that we don't know the details of. And we're not sure what the possible outcome could have been. No.
Let me tell you something. I'm allowing the senator to put forward a view as a result or on the category as clarification, because you sit there going, there is no burn unit there. I know as a fact that there is a burn unit at the University of the West Indies where I've had people attend. So I'm allowing her to clarify.
Hundreds of Jamaicans are treated in these facilities throughout Jamaica. So please, Let us not politicize a very unfortunate outcome that happened to one of our citizens. Thank you.
Mr. President, Delcita Anderson is poor.
Brown, you could say I was of the view that Jamaica did not have a burn.
But you don't sit over here, sir.
No.
You don't sit over here.
And I'm not going to be there for a while either.
Maybe you won't be in the chamber at all.
You could say, exactly, you could say, I'm grateful for the clarification from the medical doctor. I know you wouldn't do it, but I'm telling you what the decent thing to do is.
No, that's not the decent thing. That's the political thing to do.
No. The decent thing is to say the medical doctors pointed out that they are burn units. They may not be what exists in Florida or in New York, but we have burn units. So don't sit there and keep saying there is no burn unit, there is no burn unit, and you are politicizing, as the doctor rightly pointed out, an unfortunate circumstance.
The only politics in this is you and the doctor. Let me be clear. Let us... Kerry Ann Collins died from burns. And the minister is reported to have said that burn units are too expensive. And I want to know, how can it be that burn units exist and we're not told that there are other patients there? And that's why Kerry Ann Collins died. She died. She lived on Spanish Town Road, but she was a citizen of this country. And I want to recommend that of this $57 billion that is going to be taken out of housing trust, some be put aside to construct a proper, as efficient and sufficient burn unit, so that the poor people of Jamaica who can't fly out, who have to go fund me to get care, that some of this $57 billion, which is because employers employ workers, that money is now available to government. That a burn unit be established, and I hope the doctor support me on that. I hope you, Mr. President, support me on that. And I hope the rest of the senators on that side, as those on this side, support me that we need a functioning burn unit to protect poor people. It tugs on my heart what happened to that lady. Tugs on my heart to see what happened to other people who get burned. You could be driving a motor vehicle and get in an accident on the road and get burned up. You could be in your house and get burned up. You could be Senator Sinclair in a bad relationship and somebody burn you up. That's the reality in our country. And so, Senator, it's not enough to tell me that there's a burn unit. It's to tell me that there's a burn unit that is efficient and can take care of poor people, Picnic. That's what we need to know. And you have $57 billion. Out of the 145 billion over 13 years. Let's establish a burn unit. It is not a lack of money, Minister Tufton. It's not a lack of money. It's not that it's expensive, but that it is necessary for poor people to be able to survive and not die a horrible death because they got burned up. Any one of us can get burned up. So I want to make that clear, that this opposition believes that some of the money that is being taken from NHT should be used in establishing a well-functioning burn unit in the country. The other thing I want to propose, Mr. President, as I close, is that I've been doing some research on salary levels in the country. And I came upon the salary level of the orderlies and other members of the staff of the parliament. And I know it's Christmas and you, Mr. President, will sit on your chair and raise praises for them. But it's time for us not only to raise some praise, but to give them some raise. 2 weeks ago, I called, after 7 o'clock, I called a member of parliament to discuss a matter with him. I got no answer on the line. But I got a text message that he was still in parliament, which means that he was not alone here. The staff that sometimes we call upon to work on weekends, Center Hill, was present here too. But if you, as a man who was at finance, do like me, Ministry of Finance, check their levels of remuneration. If you check the steno writers, who one day we may wake up and find they're not here, because some of them are on contract. So I am making a plea, Senator Gill, in the spirit of each of you, Lawson Shearer, for the staff of the Parliament in 2021, not just to talk, Senator Bram, about a new Parliament building, but to put the whole wine in the new building. It's to look after the staff, treat them as a unique group. Never had it. Never had it. But you have it now. You have it now. Don't shy away from it. No, you have it now. You have it now. I will tell you this. As spokesperson on the public service, whenever we get the power, I will make sure it is done. I'm begging you to do it before I get there. I'm begging you to do it before I get there. So, Mr. President, this ought not to be a controversial issue. The staff serve us and we love. Mr. President, I can't hear myself. Senator Braham seems to be. I'm not setting you up against the staff. That is your fault. It's not my fault. Yes, it is. I am urging all of us here. It's a disgrace. You shouldn't do it. Well, you are the disgrace in that case, for your interpretation of what I'm saying. Is he finished, Mr. President, so I can continue my presentation? Mr. President, I am calling upon this Parliament.
As a man who to interrupt people, supposed to know when him stop interrupt you.
I know him stop, so I'm cool. I'm calling upon this Parliament, the President, the Speaker, the Minister responsible for Parliamentary Affairs, not just to laud the staff with praises, but to seek in 2021 to ensure that they are properly rewarded and treated good, because they have treated us well. They have given the necessary support to all of us in this Parliament. Good. And when we think of it, Mr. President, and I look to see, I get a stipend for attending and participating. And when I compare my stipend with the research I did and their staff, their salary, the inequity is such that all 21 of us in the Senate must join with the 63 downstairs and say enough is enough. We need to give them a better deal in 2021. May it please you, Mr. President, we support the deductions from the NHT, the withdrawals from the NHT. We will never, never shy away from principle. We will not oppose for oppose's sake. And I hope the lesson would have been learned by those on the other side, that when you see a good thing, support it. When something is right, support it. Don't let expediency and opportunism be the gauge that you use. Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, in the presentation made by the presentation made by Senator Gale, he mentioned the question of the procurement rules. And I found that interesting because sometime last year I made certain comments concerning those very rules, Mr. President, and the value of those rules in terms of how they affect development in terms of the speed. As I understand it, Mr. President, the purpose of the procurement rules is to ensure transparency and accountability, and we all support that. Certainly I do. However, by my own short relationship with a government agency, I do know that the procurement rules and the way they're organized, they are not very flexible, Mr. President. And if you wish to implement projects on a rapid basis in government, then it seems to me that the speed and efficiency of the processes of government ought to be considered. And indeed, sir, I continue to call for a comprehensive review of the government processes, not only for us to account to prevent thievery, but also to account and to compensate and commend those who are efficient. What if we could, in short order, propose a housing development or any other development, and it takes less than 3 years to carry it out? It takes a year instead. What difference it would make to people's lives? How many more houses could be built to the benefit of the poor and the not so poor, Mr. President? I think the time has come that if I was a person who liked commission of inquiries, I would ask for one. But the time has come that the people and the government consider setting up some form of review to assist this matter to ensure that we get the best of both worlds. We keep the transparency, we keep the accountability, but we also increase speed and efficiency. And that would enable the NHT to build even more houses. They have done so well, but can you imagine if they were able to push out with greater speed and efficiency, Mr. President? I think that we ought to consider it, and I would commend it even as I support the bills. Thank you.
Senator Brown, thank you very much. Senator Crawford.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, let me also extend my own welcome to the new leader of opposition business, Senator Peter Bunting, and to pledge my own commitment to the team, to his efforts, and to the success of the opposition benches as it relates to our lobby within the Senate.
We never questioned your commitment to anything.
So, President, we ask for protection from the President. Well, Mr. President, in all seriousness, Mr. President, one of the bills put forward was titled appropriately number 2. That is the fiscal rules, financial, right, number 2. You remember, Senator Brown, that it came before us before number 1. And when number 1 came, I asked what were the bases of the numbers and the targets that were put forward. What were the projections that were in place to suggest that we won't have a number 3 and a number 4? At that time, Mr. President, I indicated a paper I wrote on tourism estimated recovery time to be best case June 2021 and most likely case December 2021. I saw this morning where Adam Stewart has subsequently agreed that he expects 2021 December. But at the time, the Minister of Tourism was suggesting almost next week. He said June 2020 was the likely recovery time. I'm not seeking to discredit the minister, but if these projections are not logical, then we will have number 3 and number 4. And that is not an efficient way and an efficient strategy. Mr. President, Senator Hill made mention to the fact that the foreign exchange earnings have been holding. And I wonder how much research we're doing, Senator Hill, on the reason for the fallout within tourism, but the foreign exchange and the earnings of foreign exchange seems to be holding. Is there a correlation between the free money in the United States and the increase in remittances coming to Jamaica? And if there is that correlation, and not just the US, because also in Canada they've been giving out money. If there's such a correlation, is there a projection to the end of that free money and by extension an estimated fallout from some of the remittances that have been keeping us afloat? Indeed, I asked myself the other day, and in a Senate group I also said, have we ever measured the informal remittances created by Jamaicans traveling? You know, a man coming from New York for Christmas, about 40 people give him $20 to give them cousin. And it's not recorded as remittances, but as less and less can travel, then maybe less and less remittances is coming. Have we tried to calculate that possibility and the fallout? And I'm asking that because I feel personally that we are underestimating the current impact of COVID, and we are definitely underestimating the length of the tail of COVID. I want to have a reasoning with you, Senator Hill. Senator Hill, we often speak to the multiplier effect of positive things, but there's also a multiplier effect of negative things. And there is, I presume, going to be a new normal that business and companies have found we could have operated with less. I am a businessman, I can tell you that profit maximization is one of your number one concerns, yes. And before COVID, I had 2 managers for 1 farm. I had a chicken manager and a goat manager. Since COVID, I have 1 manager. And I've learned that maybe I never needed 2 managers before. What does that suggest? It suggests that even when we rebound, that my employment will not change back to where it was because I have found I had inefficiencies unperceived by me. COVID has forced many businesses to become more efficient, in particular in labor, and by extension may cause for higher unemployment in a more permanent basis. Have we perceived that? We look at the hotels and we say, oh, the hotels are down. And the hotels have a greater ability to raise funds and to get grants, and governments will always seek to bail out the hotels. There was a grant for tourism entities that did not consider the supply chain. And so when the tourism and the thing come back, there will be many within the supply chain that cannot recover. I put it to you, Senator Hill, that importation to support the tourism activities when we rebound will be high for the medium term. I'll give you one simple example of a business. I mean eggs. It takes 21 weeks for a bird to start laying. So therefore, if the hotel should come back tomorrow, it will take 21 weeks for us to start to sell them back eggs, because we have to kill the birds that we used to use to supply the hotels. That means that the immediate recovery of the economy isn't automatic, isn't immediate when COVID ends. And therefore, the tail of this thing will be extended. I'll give another example of some of the people who are being affected by COVID that some of us don't even recognize. There's some people who used to hire a helper for 4 or 5 days. They're now hiring them for 2 days. Someone. Some saying, since I'm home, I'll clean my own yard and I'll wash my own clothes. We have not really seen that person being the helpers being spoken about. There are some people who used to be in the supermarket, and I said, as we go more online purchasing, as we go more curbside pickups, how much less cashiers we're going to need? And how is that going to be? Because these people now have very transferable skills. What's going to be the tail? And I'm creating that case because within the NHT bill, it says that there's a great need for intervention, as was the care package. Remember, however, that the care package focused almost exclusively on those who were in need and those who worked within the hotel. There was a whole segment, I think $56,000, that were for people working in the hotel, but there was no employment income. I think $10,000 was the maximum for those who weren't working in the hotel. Mr. President, you'll understand that $10,000 over the last 8-9 months, we're looking at $1,000 a month. $1,000 a month over 30 days. That sounds like my mathematics, 100 divided by 3, $33 a day. So in real reality, it was immaterial though necessary, and it never considered all the people that are being affected. Late to the game was those in entertainment. And I'm glad to see the former councillors and the mayor present. The entertainment fraternity is under siege. They're suffering. They're selling their equipment. So it don't mean that as soon as we allow entertainment, they'll be able to jump back in, because they have been sustaining Senator Longmore's mortgage without events, their only income. They have been sustaining families without events. They have been sustaining food and natural daily sustenance without events. And they have done that by selling assets, selling the chalk, selling the sound. They have equally started doing that by being against the law, still keeping something, so much so that Minister Mackenzie had to come out to say that, and the police have put out a flyer, do you know of any illegal parties? They have reached to the point that they are now seeking to just survive even against the law. You have a whole set of people who were looking forward to Christmas for the next 3 months of earnings. A whole set of farmers that was looking to Christmas that rain has affected. So when we say that we are going to make an intervention, I want to focus, like Senator Brown, on what is the intervention. Because unlike the other side, Senator Brown, I never resisted the first allocation. Unlike the other side, I never resisted Petro-Carib. And you see, Mr. President, I wanted to say that Senator Brown had to go to the Privy Council because the CCJ was also resisted. So that's why you had to go there. They say you shouldn't go there, but you had to go there. No. To go there. It was a part of it. Mr. President, there is in my mind a need at this time, whether short-term, mid-term, or long-term, for the consideration of a universal basic income or a universal minimum income. This is not a new debate, It's a debate that has been going on since the 1970s. Finland actually tried a strategy for a universal basic income. Canada recently said they'll give everybody 2,000 Canadian dollars. The UK, Donald Trump, who we all ridicule, actually was trying to do some intervention for COVID. But I believe... What?
Donald Trump, who we all what?
Who we often ridicule. And you in particular, Mr. President. Yes, not all of us. Not all. But the point I'm trying to make, Mr. President, is that there is going to be so many of us that are going to be in an unfortunate state of inequity. Let me give you a group. Those that used to work on cruise ships. those persons used to carry members of them family because they would earn tips, earn US, etc., come down, and they will carry members of their family. Those are now being carried by members of their families. They used to work on the cruise ship. Have we analyzed, Mr. President, what is the impact short and mid-term of a change in government in the United States? Is there likely to be another shutdown in the United States because the opinion of the Democrats didn't seem to be opening up as it was the opinion of the Republicans? And if there's a shutdown, what is the impact that it will have on tourism moving forward after the swearing in? Have we calculated those things? And what impact that have on the full network of tourism, but also what impact that is having now on those who are looking forward to Grand Market? What impact is happening downtown for those who used to sell for Christmas party and Christmas events that is no longer being held? And so that's why I think that because of the widespread impact, you cannot have this piecemeal intervention when the impact is so widespread. Some teachers now have children living with them from them grand cousin in the country simply for internet. And that teacher will not be considered for intervention, but now in need because her family have expanded without her intentions. And her income has not expanded. So we have always said, yeah, we need this universal basic income, but Jamaica can't afford it. In fact, that is the number one argument. I was reading a UNDP paper where it says that unsustainable deficits is the number one critique of a universal basic income. However, what is the cost of guarding against increased inequities and increased social tension due to that increase in equity? And to that extent, Senator, I said to myself, and I said to my party, and I said to the manifesto committee at the time, maybe we should start with a universal household income. And it was ridiculed, but Ransford, Senator Brian would tell you, blessed are those who are persecuted. And another person who was a prime minister said, if you believe in what you're saying, say it until they say, why you never say it long time. Another prime minister told me that. We said that we should target a household income because there was an inability to afford a material individual minimum income. And so therefore, because we couldn't afford a material individual income, then we should target a material household minimum income, that each household should have a particular minimum. But, Senator, we had to equally consider the culture of Jamaica that calls for households not to be automatic mother-father children. There are households with 3 different family units within the household. So, if you should give money to a household with 4 different heads, then you're creating more violence than we already have, because the division of that money is a difficult task. That was the reason why we said that we were proposing the light bill payment, because a bill would have covered the entire household and therefore everybody would have benefit. Say it until they say, why you never say it long time?
Not in here, but not in here.
In here too.
No. So you could stick to the legislation. I see the time, it's almost 1 o'clock.
President, let me tell you what the legislation is. The legislation...
Focus, man. Focus.
Senator, the objective, it says the COVID-19 pandemic continues to severely impact the government's financial resources, and it suggests, therefore, including the government's COVID-19 allocation of resources for employees' care program, it is estimated that we need this 11.4 billion. I'm saying, Mr. President, that per year, the COVID care has been critiqued by the Auditor General. The COVID care has been suggested to have many openings, avenues of corruption, probability and possibility of corruption. There's a newspaper article that spoke to many persons who were not qualified receiving funding, and by extension persons who were qualified not receiving funding. The COVID care in its execution has proven to be anti-COVID protection because people were gathering at the banks, crowds were gathering at the place. The COVID care has proven itself to be inefficient because the unbanked was so great that we had to now send money through Western Union, which had a fee. The COVID care has proven not to necessarily be the best method for 11.4 billion per year, 15.7 billion in 5 years. And I'm simply saying that in and as much as I am for this intervention, where the economists have suggested that interventions like these are necessary even for jump-starting the economy, that we believe that there may be more efficient strategies to intervene. And so, Mr. President, I want to understand, firstly, if the 11.4 billion is what you want to take, or is it all you can take? Is this all, I'm saying, Senator Hill, is 11 billion all you will take, or is it all you can take? Per annum. And I'm asking that, Senator, this is why I'm asking. If it is all you can take, then we have no further conversation because you're stuck at that. But if it is all you will take, then maybe we can now discuss what are some of the other avenues that can also intervene in this COVID crisis. One of the necessary interventions for the COVID crisis is housing, is comfortable housing, because stay at home is an order. So if it is that people now have comfortable housing, the stay-at-home order is a difficult thing to actually, exactly. You are almost having to break the rule because of your circumstance. Yeah. All of us in here don't know that circumstance. Some of us have forgotten that circumstance. But I can tell you that staying at home without a bathroom is a difficult task. Staying at home with a leaking roof is a difficult task. Staying at home without a kitchen is a difficult task. Staying at home with a one-bedroom with children is a difficult task. You know what's going on, my mayor down in Olympic? Some of those housing need intervention. And so if we were going to encourage staying home, then one intervention that NHT can facilitate, which we also recommended Senator Fraser Binns in the manifesto as well, was to say that make we give a $400,000 grant, $4 billion to 10,000 people a year. $4 billion to 10,000 people. Of a $400,000 grant, once the local government authorities declare that there is a necessary intervention for housing comfort. I don't talk about who want a bigger house. I say who want a bathroom, who want a kitchen, who want a roof. In fact, there was a study on the NHT that said that the poorest was subsidizing the richest because the poorest were not benefiting. And in as much as we say, oh, you can get 2,500 and all that, 2.5 million, and we applaud that, there's a group that will benefit from the 2.5 million. No, I'm not in the mood for quarrel Cavan. But Cavan can carry the information for me. Senator Gale, you are a conduit to the board, Senator Gale. There are many people who can benefit from their own barter of services and by extension can do things cheaper than we think they can do it. I know some people who are not steelmen, are not electricians, are not masons, they're all of the above. Plumbers, and they can intervene on their own behalf. I know of communities where everybody will come help. So when we see 400,000, it can do great intervention for some of these places whose people are almost automatically on the road claiming that they're flouting the law when it's really a lack of options to them. Imagine 10,000 people, 1,000 down in Olympic this year, next year another 10,000. You imagine 10,000 people being able to say, okay, I can now have a kitchen. If our people have nowhere they're comfortable, they're closer to being dangerous. If we have citizens that is not comfortable anywhere at all, Senator Gale, at least a yard. At least the government's intent should be that at home you're comfortable. At least the government intent. And so if we can work through the local government, through the parish councils, to have a unit and the councillors and these people to identify houses for intervention, that 4 billion per year might be a positive spend for the COVID intervention and a targeted spend for the COVID intervention so that we can now get some benefits out of that. Mr. President, we also have to look, Mr. President, on what is the responsibility of government in rebooting a economy. If you look at economics, they often say that government spending is one of the variables that cause for an engine of economic activity, government spending. And so when Senator Fraser-Binns spoke to the roads within the housing schemes, the roads within the NHT and other schemes, that is government spending, engineering work, engineering activity. So when you just give a 10,000, some man drink out that by later. You know? In fact, there's very little gender equity when you just give away money. So, you know? Because some women have a hand over that. You know? Some women collect this money and out of fear have to distribute it to people who are now collected. Well, Senator Langmore, you know that there are some people selling in the market and them have to pay people out of what they earn. So you don't believe that in some of these communities, when they collect, it have to share. If when they work, it have to share. Then when they get in, I think it have to share. We're going like we don't know the culture of our society. That's why I say, when they get JPS, take a light, then let them take a light. They can't take the light. It was an effort to say, our problems are not simple enough. Yet we seek to find simple solutions. And our problems are not simple. The need for government now is to say to ourselves, how do we ensure our people survive the pandemic? And how do we ensure that they rebound quickly thereafter? And I don't believe enough information is being given when we say we're taking this money without giving further details as to how we will spend it. Because if it is inappropriately spent, inappropriately spent, then we will always be here seeking to get more and more money. I fear for the method of implementation that you apply and somebody have to approve. I fear for that intervention. And so therefore I recommend that we reconsider a minimum household income and a method of implementing that minimum household income. Because to give 10,000 every 8 months, it would not be a sustainable economic effort, and it would not be the best way to impact on our spending. I close, Mr. President, by reminding you of a voice note that I heard, where she said, don't misunderstand a recording for a voice note. Not a recording, a voice note. Very, very big difference. No. Please, no recording. Mr. President, there was a mother who said to a teacher, she said, Miss, you have to send back the work because we'd have to take down the light. Police was coming. The child could not continue in class because the illegal light had to be disconnected. A part of that 400,000 can be to put on some of these people official light. And they don't have to fear. because there's another 4,000 to pay for it. What I'm saying, Mr. President, let us look deeper. After the elections, we now have to now automatically critique. Let us look deeper into the possible solutions for intervention on behalf of the people. And I commit to you the World Bank study on universal minimum income, a universal basic income. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Crawford. Senator Hill.
Mr. President, I'm very pleased to hear that our colleagues across the aisle are going to support the NHT bill, and we hear their concerns. I want to openly agree with a lady who has only sons, but I call Sarah's mother, because I hear she's going to have Sarah. Senator Fraser Binns, to say, yes, you are absolutely right about the work that so many at the NHT do day in, day out. And I join with you, and I know my side joins with you and your side to congratulate them and recognize and appreciate the consistent work that they do for thousands of people across this country. In the same vein, the NHT will continue to do good work for people across the country. The minister who is responsible for the NHT, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, has provided excellent governance for the NHT because as a policymaker he does not run the NHT. And the issue of taking money from the NHT at a time of desperate health and economic downturn in Jamaica has been seen not just taking from the NHT, but the way Jamaica has managed its affairs. The Prime Minister, his Minister of Health, the CMO, the Minister of Finance, Foreign Minister, the Minister of Local Government, all together when COVID hit, everybody was up there up front and doing a job that internationally has been recognized as a job doing well. We speak of things in Jamaica, Mr. President, and I'm pleased to see that you talk about, Senator Crawford has talked about making sure people have good houses, especially at a time when people have to work from home. I mean, we know NCB, an institution that I'm quite familiar with. They released figures recently to say 62% of their employees work from home and they're not coming back to offices. That's one of the big employers in the country, employing people getting good salaries. That means, Mr. President, not only NCB, but other companies that I know of have provided desks, laptops, electricity bill payment, those kind of things to make sure that their employees do well at home. But that's for those employees. The Prime Minister has committed to build 70,000 homes in the next 5 years, largely from NHT money, to benefit Jamaicans. Senator Crawford, we're committed to make sure people have new, good homes to live in. That's a part of what we do. I made it very clear that in the next couple of years, not 25 or 22.1 billion that was taken in 2014 to build houses at that time when the first drawdown was made. But in the next couple of years, we're going to take $58 billion and $65 billion to build houses through NHT. That's a commitment of the government, and we're going to do it. We're going to build new good houses, Senator Crawford, for a lot of people. Burn units, we actually do have burn units in the country, But we hear Senator Brown. We know how passionate he can be about anything he's involved in. And so we hear you. I'm sure the Minister of Health hears you. But the money that we're taking from NHT is not just to do that, but to make sure the fiscal stability that, in truth, your side worked hard to bring. We're not going to take that away from you. So, but you don't want us to not continue it. We need, in a pandemic, which is 1 in 100 years, to get money from that NHT rather than go and raise taxes on people who have already lost some jobs and are waiting to get new jobs. So, Mr. President, it's a good, sensible move. It's a good way to manage an economy. In fact, it's a great way to do it, and we're going to make sure we do it properly and well. The CARE program we spoke about, Senator Crawford talked about CARE and women. 60% of the people who got money from the CARE program are women, and we're very proud to say that. So again, the consideration, I am looking at boards, and the issue of, my cabinet colleagues will tell you, you can't bring up the board unless you have the 30% of women involved. But in the case of CARE, is 60% of them are women who get that benefit. And I'm very happy for that, because women do a lot of leading in this country, and we appreciate it. But as we look at this going forward, the best sustainable income, and I hear what you say about, and I know the discussion, the economic discussion about giving that basic income, however fashion it takes. But I can tell you the best basic income you can get is when small businesses like yours, medium-sized businesses and big businesses employ people. And the job of the government is to set the economic ecosystem so businesses can employ people. That is economic stability. And we're aiming, this money that we're taking from NHT is to make sure we have the stability so the government can provide what it must do, those things that we must do. In other words, no private sector person won't build any road between Spanish Town and Port Royal. Government has to do that, so we're going to do it. No private person is spending $60 million to put water from Ferry to Port Royal. We'll do it. People get work. That's the best way. That's the best way to provide sustained income for people, is to make sure we put in the infrastructure that businesses can use to build and provide jobs. So, Mr. President, with that, I ask that the bill be read a second time.
The question relates to the two bills.
Yes,
so I'm going to take both of them. I have to take both of them individually, but with the permission of the leaders, we will go to committee with both bills, okay? Yes. So the first question that I put is that an act to amend the financial administration, I'm sorry, let me take housing trust first, because that's the one you dealt with. The first question that I put is that an act to amend the National Housing Trust be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against? Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the National Housing Trust Act, read a second time.
The second question I put is that an act to further amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act be read for a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Further Amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act, read a second time.
Thank you. The Senate will now resolve itself. No. Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. It is pointed out to me that it is 18 minutes past 1, so let me just take that motion now before I move on.
Mr. President, the time being almost 1:20, might the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
It being 1:20 somewhere, the question is that the Senate be allowed to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day. Those in favor? Against? The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider both bills, that is to say, an act to amend the National Housing Trust Act and an act to further amend the Financial Administration Audit Act. You see, you confuse me now. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider both acts, both bills, clause by clause. So we are in committee, and I'm going to deal first of all with the Housing Trust Act. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill, the one we just dealt with relating to the Housing Trust, having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. With respect to the act to further amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act, I put clause 1. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report this bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Thank you, Marshall. I do report both bills as having passed committee stage without amendment.
Mr. President, I now ask that the bills be read a third time.
The question is that the bills be read a third time. Those in favor? Against? Madam Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the National Housing Trust Act, read a third time and passed. And a bill entitled An Act to Further Amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act, read a third time and passed.
Thank you very much. Leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is now intended to proceed with the next two items on the bill, but in order to do so, I also wish to ask for recommittal of notices of motion given orally.
Thank you. The question is that the item notices of motions given orally be recommitted. Those in favor? Against?
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motions. It seems of the Senate. Senate is a House of Parliament, but okay. The Banking Services Designated Financial Services Business of Buying and Selling Foreign Currency Order Resolution 2020, whereas under Section 2.1 of the Banking Services Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, financial services includes a service designated as a financial service by the supervisor by order published in the Gazette and subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas on the 25th day of November 2020, the supervisor made the banking services designated financial services business of buying and selling foreign currency order 2020, and whereas it is desirable that the banking services designated financial services business of buying and selling foreign currency order 2020 be affirmed by resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Banking Services Designated Financial Services Business of Buying and Selling Foreign Currency Order Resolution 2020. 2. The Banking Services Designated Financial Services Business of Buying and Selling Foreign Currency Order 2020 is hereby affirmed. The Banking Services Designated Financial Services Provision of Electronic Retail Payment Services Order Resolution 2020. Whereas under Section 2.1 of the Banking Services Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, financial services includes a service designated as a financial service by the supervisor by order published in the Gazette and subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas on the 25th day of November 2020, the supervisor made the Banking Services Designated Financial Services Provision of Electronic Retail Payment Services Order 2020, and whereas it is desirable that the Banking Services Designated Financial Services Provision of Electronic Retail Payment Services Order 2020 be affirmed by resolution. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable Senate as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Banking Services Designated Financial Services Provision of Electronic Retail Payment Services Order Resolution 2020. 2. The Banking Services Designated Financial Services Provision of Electronic Retail Payment Services Order 2020 is hereby affirmed. Mr. President, my apologies. I also beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that this Honourable Senate appoint a select committee comprising the following members: the Honourable Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, the Honourable Senator Aubin Hill, Senator Ransford Braham, Senator Charles Sinclair, Senator Peter Bunting, Senator Donna Scott Motley, to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the House of Representatives to consider and report on a bill entitled An Act to Provide for National Identification and Registration Authority, for a National Identification System, and for connected matters. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take these motions. Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the first two motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members should have heard the question. Those in favour? Against?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the two banking orders, which, or rather the two resolutions which I have just read, relate to two banking orders which will designate, when passed, electronic retail payment services and the buying and selling of foreign exchange as financial services under the Banking Services Act. It may come as a surprise to some that these services are not already so designated, but this is indeed a gap to be closed by us by proceeding with these matters today. Mr. President, it's one of the objectives of the Bank of Jamaica to ensure that there is appropriate regulatory oversight for anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism measures. And this must, of course, include oversight of services provided by cambios and electronic retail payment service providers. The BOJ is therefore seeking the designations before us today to fulfill certain recommendations and address deficiencies identified in the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force Mutual Evaluation Report on Jamaica. Mr. President, members of this Honourable Senate may recall that the 2017 report of the CFATF, which assessed the AML-CFT measures or systems in existence as at June 2015, Jamaica was rated poorly in 23 out of 40 Financial Action Task Force recommendations. As members of the Senate, and in fact both houses would recall, we have been working assiduously on these matters, including the passage of significant legislation last year, together with their supporting regulations under both the Terrorism Financing Act, Terrorism Prevention Act, and the POCA. Mr. President, You may wish to know, and the Senate might be interested to learn, that just last week at a review meeting of the CFATF, Jamaica has been upgraded in 12 recommendations. We applied for reclassification and we have been upgraded on 12 recommendations, but clearly there's still work to do. So the government is actively seeking to continue to improve our ratings by taking the necessary legislative and administrative measures to address deficiencies. These ministerial orders will undoubtedly contribute to the enhancement of the legal framework required to meet international standards. Mr. President, you will note that in Section 2 of the Banking Services Act, the term financial institution is defined as a person who undertakes or engages in financial services. The definition of financial services under the BSA, however, does not include the buying or selling of foreign currency or the provision of e-payment services. So the FATF includes in its definition of financial institutions any natural or legal person who conducts as a business services related to money or transfer of value, trading in foreign exchange, and money and currency changing. The orders before us will accordingly align all three. That is, the FATF designation, the definition of financial institution, and the definition of financial services under the BSA. So currently, Mr. President, the Central Bank is engaged in a project to prepare policy proposals to strengthen the legislative and regulatory framework for the regulation of such payment services, to provide the enabling environment for the delivery of regulated financial services to Jamaicans. The designation of payment services as financial services will complement the BOJ's efforts at improving financial access under the National Financial Inclusion Strategy as well. Mr. President, the bill, again, is not a long one, and Clause 1, colleagues, I'm not putting it in the universe. You know, we know. As the young people will type, IYK, YK. So, Clause 1 cites the name of the order in respect of both orders, as I'm taking them both together. The interpretation clause in respect of electronic retail payment instrument and retail payment services are designated, or rather defined, in that order. And I just want to point out that I raised a question when I looked at the definition for electronic retail payment, that it didn't have the word electronic, and I thought this was a bit strange to me. But they indicated that in the context, the language is taken exactly from the electronic payment regulation guidelines, and because everything dealt with therein is electronic, and as the designation of the order is electronic, that there is no likelihood of any confusion as a result thereof. I had wondered, and I presume colleagues who read the orders raised the same query, so that all of the documents work together and should be read as one. Mr. President, of course, in the business of buying and selling foreign currency orders, this same order is followed. Clause 1 cites the name of the order. Clause 2 designates the services as banking services. And in conclusion, Mr. President, so as not to prolong the matter, I ask for the Senate's approval or affirmation of the resolutions both tabled. Mr. President, if I may be permitted, as I am on my feet, to take the Income Tax Amendment Act as well, I would be pleased so to do, and we would split again in one matter would not take committee, one would not take the other, but I'm guided. Either you want me to just take the banking or take income? All right. So, Mr. President, I am open to hear the interventions of colleagues on the orders. Thank you.
So, yeah, I agree with the decision.
Not a problem. We go to committee on the other.
No, members would have noticed that Senator Bunting is rising for the first time in the Senate. There is a usual courtesy which we may give reluctantly or not. This is not considered his maiden's presentation then.
Mr. President, thank you. This is not a controversial, these orders are not controversial. In fact, Mr. President, they're really legislative tidying up for something that already exists in practice, because the BOJ for, since the introduction of cambios has been supervising the cambios as well as the electronic retail payment services. So it is really just, tidying up so that we comply, strictly speaking, with the FATF and CFATF guidelines. I would only ask in closing if the Minister would kindly share the 12 areas in which these have been upgraded so that we can all understand the improvements. We know that many Caribbean territories have been badly affected by the blacklisting, by various European Union, other jurisdictions, and we welcome any good news in ensuring that we stay off these lists and continue to improve in terms of our rating by these international or multilateral bodies. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Minister?
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you for your, I wasn't even going to say. Thank you for your succinct presentation and support of the orders. As you correctly recognize, they are tidying up and they are ensuring that all is done in the way that it should be. So the upgrades covered both AML and CFT recommendations. They covered recommendation 12 regarding politically exposed persons, recommendation 21 addressing tipping off and confidentiality, recommendation 33 which relates to statistics, data gathering, recommendation 2 national cooperation and coordination. I'm sorry, I don't have them in numerical order. I have them in order that they were considered. Recommendation 10 on customer due diligence, recommendation 11 on record keeping, recommendation 14 on money or value transfer services, recommendation 17 reliance on third parties, recommendation 18 on internal controls and foreign branches and subsidiaries, recommendation 19 on high-risk countries, recommendation 8 on non-profit organizations, and recommendation 6 on targeted financial sanctions related to terrorism and terrorist financing. So they're cross-cutting. They didn't address one or the other, and that's why our listing overall is not yet positively impacted. But we were commended for the work that has been done, and as we are falling within our plan and outline, which of course has been shared publicly and before. We are being viewed in a positive light. And in this context, Mr. President, I ask for affirmation of the 2 orders tabled.
Thank you, Minister. Well, the members would have heard the question put by the Minister. Those in favour? Against? Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now rise to present the Income Tax Amendment Act 2020. As with the bills taken earlier, Mr. President, this is a bill whose length belies its importance, and in particular its importance to micro, small, and medium enterprises who earn up to $500 million each year and who file their taxes. Mr. President, the tax credit of $375,000 provided for in this bill is one of the revenue measures announced by the government earlier in this financial year. It's important that we pass it today, as this will ensure that it's implemented for the financial year 2020-2021. Mr. President, I think we all are in violent agreement on the fact that MSMEs are important drivers of economic growth and development in Jamaica. And importantly, certainly drivers of job creation. I think we can safely say that it is the Jamaican dream for somebody to start them little thing and to grow it and to become an employer as a means of not only fulfillment, personal development fulfillment, but of course, taking care of themselves and their families. MSMEs, Mr. President, make up more than 95% of all classified taxpayers. And the government is therefore determined to continue to recognize their importance and to encourage their growth by creating a framework of measures and solutions that help MSMEs overcome the challenges that traditionally have hindered their growth and development. Over the last 2 years, Mr. President, government has implemented a suite of measures geared towards these goals. And these measures have included the abolishment of the asset tax, the abolishment of minimum business tax, an increase in the GCT threshold from $3 million to $10 million. And indeed, these measures were made possible by capitalizing on fiscal space created in the budget by our progress in reducing the national debt. Mr. President, as this part of this suite of measures, the bill before us today will further stimulate investments, catalyze job creation, increase staff retention, as well as, of course, Mr. President, ensuring that we continue to create a productive society. Mr. President, when the measures were first announced, certainly the challenges to businesses and workers brought on by the pandemic could not have been envisaged. But it is our vision, our belief as a government that the measures are now needed more than ever, because we do need our businesses to remain in operation and to be able to retain employees insofar as is possible. Mr. President, we are therefore seeking to ensure that sufficient assistance and stimulus is providing while encouraging formalization in a way that will sustainably help micro, small and medium enterprises and their employees weather the storms of the pandemic. So very quickly, Mr. President, Clause 1, of course, cites the name of the order and gives the operational day as January 1st. Clause 2 has 6 parts which seek to integrate the tax credit for MSME businesses into the domestic legislation by inserting a new 32B into the Income Tax Act. Clause 2.1 indicates the terms of the tax credit, setting out the gross revenue earnings of the that must be earned by the beneficiary, by a company that's a beneficiary, as well as indicating that sets and sets out the amount of the credit. Mr. President, Clause 2 details the entitlement, that is, they assess the fact that they are a body corporate and that they have been had met the requisite criteria set out in 1 in the year of assessment. And Clause 3, 2.3 contains a list of entities which are not entitled to claim a benefit. So this is to ensure that you're not getting 2 bites of the cherry if you're benefiting already from income tax benefits as a building society or under the Industrial and Providence Acts. If you are already accruing benefits under the Urban Renewal Tax Relief Act, if you are a developer benefiting under the Special Economic Zones Act, a bauxite or alumina producer, again, having incentives under their relevant act, or if you are a company that is trading on the Junior Stock Exchange and benefiting under that act, under those regulations, and those are the entities which are referred to in E as the entities under the 7th schedule of the Income Tax Act, Mr. President, then you are not entitled to this credit. Clauses 2.4 and 2.6 contain rules to facilitate administration of credit, and Clause 2.5 is the avoidance mechanism, so the mechanism which seeks to prevent abuse by how it is you account in what particular year for sales or revenue in order to try to apply for, or rather to benefit from this Act. So, Mr. President, those are the provisions, and it is in this context the indisputable benefit to accrue therefrom being the cushioning of small businesses, micro, small, and medium businesses, which form the backbone of our economy, and the assistance which they will, of course, give to the Jamaicans who they employ. Considering its urgency and far-reaching benefits, Mr. President, I commend the clauses of the Income Tax Amendment Act 2020 for the approval of the Senate. I look forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Minister. Ms. Curtis. Senator Bunting.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. The opposition cannot help but support this amendment to the Income Tax Act. In fact, Mr. President, we're often criticized that we just oppose. Oppositions, not this one, but generally speaking, or those on, if one side of the aisle proposes it, the other opposes it, just almost out of habit or a knee-jerk reaction. But members may recall that in 2018, when I was the opposition spokesperson on industry, investment, and commerce, I had made a number of suggestions to the Minister of Finance at the time, who was then a freshly minted Minister of Finance, and he took very detailed notes of the recommendations that I made. The first had to do with raising, well, the burden of my presentation then, or the recommendations, was that MSMEs have to really be the engine of growth in an economy. And that the weight of bureaucratic compliance was so heavy that instead of encouraging MSMEs, it discouraged them. This wasn't specific to any administration, just over time, the bureaucracy had developed these measures. And a noted chartered accountant pointed out to me that it was virtually impossible for MSMEs or businesses with a turnover, I think, of less than, say, $3 million a month. It was virtually impossible for them to comply with all the GCT, the income tax, the various companies' office if they were an incorporated entity. And I made a series of recommendations then. And as I said, the minister took detailed notes and he implemented the following year, raising the threshold on GCT. I had actually, on behalf of the opposition, recommended raising it to 30 million. But I accepted that he didn't want to move it straight from 3 million to 30 million. So an interim step was to raise it to 10 million. We supported it at the time. In fact, the then opposition spokesman on finance pointed out a technicality that actually improved the recommendation when the bill came back to the House, because it didn't give the option, so persons could still benefit. There are some businesses who benefited from being able to file GCT. And so it was further enhanced, and I think it is working well. We look forward to that threshold being increased. The second, or a second recommendation I pointed out then, was that businesses, small businesses who started in a form of a company were disadvantaged relative to a sole proprietor. Because a sole proprietor had an income tax, could enjoy income tax or a tax-free threshold of up to 1.5 million of income, while a company didn't have any corresponding threshold. At the time, I recommended the company should even have a slightly higher threshold, especially to cover all the other costs of compliance with the Companies Act. So in a sense, although what I recommended was a 2 million threshold for income tax, the tax credit essentially achieves the same thing. This is just another way of achieving the same objective. And therefore, you know, we must support it. I hope, I'm looking forward to some of the other suggestions that we made at that time. For example, to move away from a special consumption tax on fuel to a GCT on fuel. And that, you know, created some imbalances because a special consumption tax can't be offset against your output tax, GCT, in the same way that a GCT can as an input tax. And therefore, essentially, what it ended up being was that companies that relied heavily on fuel as an input cost, companies like quarries, for example, where, you know, heavy equipment and generators, etc., were being used, were at a major disadvantage because the special consumption tax ended up just being essentially a tax, an irrecoverable tax. And it was such a significant input into their business that even though, say, transportation services were exempt, in recognition of that, other businesses which were quite energy intensive, fuel intensive in terms of their input costs, were left out. But hopefully, over time, and we know the fiscal constraints, so everything can be incorporated at once. But we welcome the raising of the threshold of the income tax, and similarly, we welcomed in 2019, I believe it was, when the threshold for GCT registration for MSMEs were introduced. I would ask the Minister in closing to just explain. I mean, I understood the avoidance provisions referred to there, but there is also the clause 232B6 in terms of the order in which you apply the corporate tax credit as against the employment tax credit. And I just wondered if the Minister has the numbers in terms of the overall effect of applying both, or one versus the other. If it's too technical, I will, you know, separately speak with the Minister of Finance on that. But just for clarification, I was asking that. But overall, Mr. President, the opposition supports it as a good start, and I think other members want to say a few words on it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Bunting. Senator Gale.
President, I join in supporting this objective in terms of applying tax credit to those small and medium-term enterprises. And I don't regard it as a good start, because I think this would be in addition to a number of other tax measures geared at small and medium-term enterprises. That is coming at a time that it's badly needed. I know a lot of these businesses are struggling because of the impact of COVID-19. And so these measures that are applied must not be taken as granted, as a given, but must be utilized especially for maximizing your efficiency in terms of the savings, and also key for job retention. Because these small and medium-term enterprises are those entities that are geared towards creating employment within certain sectors. One of the things I would want to encourage also is that some of these small and medium-term enterprises, they may create innovative solutions, design cutting-edge approaches. And when they do that, we must also look at where we can apply further incentive along those lines. President, anytime I see these incentives being applied to enterprises or employers I always think of what could be done for the workers. And I know Senator Brown would have spoken in the past about certain taxes on certain allowances that are applied to workers.
Why not draw Senator Brown in the argument?
No, I'm not joining me in the argument, but I know he tends to. I know he tends to frolic sometimes and speak from the mountaintop. But in this case, there are measures put in place for support for small and medium-term enterprises. But we must never forget what can be done to the workers. We have had situations where I've called for in this parliament an attention for the tax on concessionary loan to my members in the banking institutions. It is an albatross around their neck. And I'm calling again for that piece of taxation to be eliminated. Not totally, I want it to be eliminated. What has happened is that it's just a continuous reduction in the provision. And also, sir, I want to encourage, especially at this time where if an employer and a group of workers agree to performance-based incentive schemes, then we'll look at how we address taxation in that regard. It's a benefit to the institutions. So I commend the objectives of this piece of legislation that is being pursued today, but I want us to look at it holistically, where we're not only looking at placing tax credit just to the enterprises, but also what we can do for the working class. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gill. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I see you trying your best to break up the union solidarity, but you can't break up Senator Gill and me when it comes to fighting for the tax and the workers. You don't have to respond. Leave that outside the house now. It wasn't meant in a hostile way.
I was just pointing out my commitment. I have sat on the board of the BITU for many, many years, many, many years.
So you support the solidarity?
Isn't that so, Senator Gill? Don't answer that.
It's on the record, say yes, sir.
I'm sure the records are not at Duke Street to show that. President, every time a tax bill comes, an amendment to the income tax, I'm going to raise the voice of the workers in respect to certain benefits. Because, Minister, if we look at 2.3, or 30, what would become 32B3, we see a lot of agencies, a lot of people who have gotten benefits. And that's good. We don't begrudge them, Senator Brown. Because we too recognize the importance of small business. You go to a local place selling flowers, and when you check, there's a lot of workers employed there. You go to wholesale, and a lot of people are employed. And if you go to a business like Damien's, which is a little bigger than the smaller ones, a lot of people are employed. Even more people than you need. So we appreciate and we believe the small business people deserve everything, including the procurement rules, which says 10% or so of the procurement nationally must be through small business. We passed that law, but I'm not sure how effective it is in terms of its implementation, because the tendency is to pass all of these laws, but then the implementation become an issue. For example, later on we'll be discussing drugs and evidence, one of the pieces of legislation will require regulations. But I won't comment now to say those regulations should accompany the bill, because it's such a short bill. But coming back to the income tax amendment, Mr. President, the workers of Jamaica since 1990s have had their uniform and laundry, the tax credit they get. And it has been there from the 90s. It's something like 5,000. So anything above that, you have to pay a tax at 25%. I don't think they can work in your factory in half of her pants. So I make this call, Minister, and ask you to convey to the Minister of Finance the need to re-examine the tax on uniform and laundry and to adjust them for inflation. And in fact, to not tax them at all. So that the orderly here, and I spend a lot of time on them today, if their jacket and tie must go to the cleaners, and they are paid for that, that payment could be taxed. The nurse, the policeman, their uniform that they must clean, if they are paid a laundry allowance, that is taxed at 25%. It shouldn't be. And I make this call, and I'll make it over and over, just as Senator Bunting said he made the call for the 30 million, and you got 10. I want to see some changes there. The other two issues I want to raise about taxes is the education tax. I said it the last time I spoke. The education tax is not for education. The money goes into the consolidated fund. Spend on everything. It's about 32 billion last year that the education tax represents, which is, as I said, an income tax, albeit not at 25%, but at about 1% of the earning from $1. And that has brought in 32 billion up to March last year and continuing, about 3 billion per year, per month. Mr. President, when I last spoke, I called for all workers earning below $1.5 million per annum to be freed from paying the education tax. I repeat that call. There is no justification to argue tax-free 1.5, but in effect you are taxing them through something called education tax, which is not for education specifically. That's an income tax by the back door. That's a scam. And we need to free the people and put some money in their pocket. They too, poor people, working people, deserve a break. And I make that call again. I make that call again. Take your hands. It's something that Sarah introduced. Under the guise that was going to fund education, life was taught us through successive regimes that it has not funded education specifically. It is really a disguised income tax. And I ask that those workers who earn below 1.5 million should be exempt from paying education tax. Final tax matter I want to raise, because it's about judgments at the IDT for unfair dismissal. The IDT is a quasi-judicial organization. It should be treated in terms of judgments, awards, in the same way courts are decided. That these workers who win an unfair dismissal which might take into account, for example, future earnings, shouldn't be taxed in the PAYE approach, but should be able to deduct expenses which they might have incurred in order to win or to get the award. It's unfair, and I'd urge, Mr. President, through the Minister, that the 1971 order re-termination benefits be revisited, that the Minister involve the trade unions in a discussion, because that was before the IDT. And let us look to see how we can benefit the workers in the way the order was intended, rather than taxing them in a PAY as if somebody has lost a job. Let's take a recent case. Was terminated in 2016, but is receiving the award in 2020. And they tax them as if they are employed in 2020, not asking what happened, battering around, trying to survive 2017, 2018, 2019. It's, in my view, unfair, and I urge the government, just as we look about other small business, and we look about backside levy relief, and we look about this tax credit, do something for the workers. So, uniform and laundry, education tax shouldn't be deducted from people below 1.5, and the 1971 order. I've made that call before. I will make it again until good sense prevails and it's accepted. Is that my shortest speech, Minister? Because I'm finished. I'm finished. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, I really do want to make a very brief intervention, because most of the persons who now start small businesses and medium-sized businesses happen to be women. And women face a lot of challenges in trying to establish their businesses, as well as trying to access funding, even with the grants and so, which have been made available. Somehow they still face an insurmountable problem. If you look at the businesses which have arisen since COVID, remarkably, those persons who are avid social media users, they will see that a lot of women are now going into doing soaps and cosmetics which are local, things for hair and so on, really beautifully packaged and of the highest possible quality. This initiative will assist them. We do know that over 80% of the persons employed in small and medium-sized enterprises are women. So the advantages which you can get from this tax relief will trickle down. I do recall that Senator Hill, when he was making his presentation earlier, had remarked that 60% of the recipients of the care package were women. I'm not sure in what category they fell. Across the board. When I meant that, I was wondering if they had been previously employed, not employed, and if they were. But I do believe that where women earn, where women benefit, it really assists a household in a very clear and strong way. Because, Mr. President, I know that you will agree with me that women tend to not have a sort of Friday evening sort of pastime which might fritter away some of the money that should be taken to the home. And Senator Samuda looks at me as if he wonders, how do I know this? But I do know this because I'm a country girl, and we know what the pastimes are like on a Friday evening. But on a more serious note, it can go a far way to building industry in this country and building creative enterprises which will enhance Jamaica's productivity. And I want to acknowledge and state my support for this amendment, if it pleases you.
Thank you very much. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will start with Senator Brown, thanking him for his brevity and hoping that this spirit will follow him into 2021. Despite the break, I'm hoping he will embrace the feeling of joy that it brings when one sits without fatigue. Senator Brown, you're missing. So, just to
indicate, Senator Bunting, what the minister did a while ago was a remote hug to Senator Brown. Yeah. So, you know, she went particularly wide.
Although there's now a man in between Senator Brown, this is not a good situation. But just to indicate that, as I know that Senator Brown is always has his finger very much on the pulse of what is happening in terms of labor matters, both in public and private sector, and accordingly he'd be aware that there is a full review, and the Minister of Finance and the Public Service has spoken about this on many occasions, and this has been across administrations, that the recognition of the number of allowances and the structure of salaries in the public sector is one of concern, and that there is, of course, a need and a desire to ensure that they are more equitable, more efficient, and deliver a better balance and incentive for productivity than they currently do. And therefore, I am sure that he will have noted on a previous occasion your specific proposals, and that they would be treated importantly, but they would be part of a big picture. And of course, we know that while we might want to pay attention to one or two in a structure that has hundreds of allowances, it is important that there be a holistic review of the structure of public sector salaries to make sure we get the best result for our workers. Mr. President, I also want to address the query made by Senator Bunting regarding the operation of the credit provided for under 2.6, and this is where reference is made, sorry, I hope you're hearing me clearly, reference is made to the credit under the income tax amendment being brought now, that is the MSME credit, being applied before the employment tax credit. And I have a helpful example here. And as you know, the employment tax credit is 30% of the income tax, or the sum of the entire specified payment, so HART, ed tax, statutory deductions, HART, etc., together, whichever is the lower. So in this circumstance, I have an example. If a company, if the tax on chargeable income for a company is 1.27, sorry, this just changed on me. Let's make sure I'm looking at the right spreadsheet. Yes. Right. If tax tax on chargeable income is $475,000. Then the corporate tax credit would be applied first, which is $375,000, and that would leave a balance of $100,000. And then the employment tax credit of $100,000 would be applied to that, leaving no tax payable. So it's possible where with a sum such as that, you end up with net zero. And that's how it's applied. So tax on chargeable income, then first your income tax, your MSME credit, and then your employment credit, and employment tax credit. That's how it is intended to apply. And in respect of the gender matter, I just want to endorse the importance placed by Senator Scott Motley on the matter of ensuring that there's an appropriate gender lens when ensuring that incentives are applied. And to share that it has in fact been studied. It's not just anecdotal. Empirical evidence exists that where cash transfers are made directly to women, they impact more directly and positively on the household and on communities, because it is studied that men in receipt of direct cash transfer do tend to spend the money in ways which are not productive for the family. And I could share the details of that, but the studies exist, Senator Campbell, and they were not done by me. No. These are so just to say that, you know, this is, you know, sometimes we think that our societies are unique, and perhaps they are in some ways, but in others we are not at all unique. These are phenomena that are replicated the world over. And, you know, institutions like the Grameen Bank will tell you why women are better credit bets than men, and that their entire business model is based on same. And this is not to say that, you know, there are not good men who spend positively and always directly in the interest of their families. Thank you, yes. nor indeed wisely, sensibly, positively, and in the interest of their families and businesses. But also, of course, just to recognize that statistically there's a reality that, that credit mechanisms should recognize. So with that, Mr. President, and just recognizing that as much as we have had issues, challenges with women accessing credit, the fact is that we have recognized that where financial institutions have made credit issuances for MSMEs, they have in large percentage been taken up by women, as much as 70% in various instances. So it is important. And Mr. President, in that context, I wish to thank colleagues for their interventions and to ask for second reading of the bill.
Question is that the bill entitled an act to amend the income tax be read for a second time, I'm sorry. Those in favor? Against? Madam Clerk?
A bill entitled an act to amend the Income Tax Act read a second time.
Thank you very much. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Against? I put clause 2. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is now intended Mr. President, it is now intended to ask for third reading of the bill.
Heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it.
A bill entitled an act to amend the Income Tax Act read a third time and passed.
sorry, you were to ask the Senate to approve the committee?
I was going to wait till the end, but I'm happy to take it now. Mr. President, I earlier gave notice of a resolution. I had asked for suspension, or rather, I gave notice of a resolution earlier in respect of the establishment of a committee to sit with one of the House of Representatives. Might standing orders be suspended to allow me to take that motion now?
Heard the question. Those in favor? Against?
Mr. President, might the resolution be approved?
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. Minister, may I inquire from you? I've consulted and would suspend the sitting for 10 minutes to take us up to 2:30.
I would have no objection, Mr. President. I don't know if there are members who wish to just press through or if everyone needs a health break. 10-minute break.
Minister, I've consulted with the technical team, although most of them have left.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, so this Honourable Senate now stands suspended. The sitting is now suspended until 2:30.